Chapter 19, USA, 10 years before launch. Asuka's first semester at Evenstar was a low-flying disaster. There were students who would do anything to advance. There were others who, like Ruth, were insufferable know-it-alls. But at least she wasn't the only one who worried about failure all the time. Asuka took to recording her classes and painstakingly rewatching them, pausing to look up each term she didn't know. She limited herself to 4 hours of sleep a night, staying up until 3 a.m. to review homework and study for tests. She drank large mugs of gritty coffee from the campus cafe until her stomach hurt. 23 kids dropped out the first week, 6 the next. By some fluke, Asuka was not among them. Everyone kept obsessive track of each departure and the total number of candidates left. She was grateful to Miki, the Japanese composer, who woke her when she overslept, saved her muffins from the dining hall, and helped her with her math. They studied elbow to elbow every evening after dinner. The Japanese reps all met once a week with a team coach, assigned by the government to make sure they stayed on track and behaved respectably. All of the richest countries provided support staff for their candidates. They had spent a lot of money to reserve seats, so they didn't want their candidates failing out. Plus, there was the hope of picking up extra wildcard seats. These meetings gave Asuka an acute pain in her chest, which she tried to alleviate by rubbing her sternum discreetly with her knuckles. She wished, not for the first time, her Japanese was better. Asuka's roommate, cool, fashionable Trina, also hung out with them. They were bold and fearless, and already a minor celebrity. A teen influencer with their own line of gender-free clothing for kids. Trina took the online commentary and swarms of media drones in stride, and they gave Asuka and Miki pointers about how to handle attention, because all Evenstar candidates were sort of semi-famous by association. Linda Trembling encouraged it. The more the world rapidly followed the competition, the more funding poured in. So, media drones had free access to campus, and fans could follow the latest stats and official updates about who was doing well and who was struggling. Trina and Miki were of two minds about it. Trina thought a candidate who raised funding for Evenstar had a stronger chance for selection. Miki believed, to play the long game well, it was better to ignore the noise. Asuka mostly just felt stressed and irritable about the whole thing, to the point that when a drone approached, she'd take the long way around to class to avoid it. She had enough other problems. One of them was that girl, Ruth, who seemed to be everywhere. Asuka'd be out for a long run on one of the paths around the lake, and she'd hear the now familiar sound of Ruth coming up behind her, and an obnoxious, "Watch it, killdeer," as Ruth passed her. And then the miserable view of her metal blade winking in the sun, and getting farther and farther ahead. She was the worst. They had history and physics together, and Ruth had an annoying habit of answering any question Asuka asked the teacher. So one day, Asuka called her out on it, and even the teacher laughed. Everyone agreed Ruth Segal Brown was too much, and that was Asuka's revenge, though it didn't feel as good as she thought it would. Later in the library, she apologized, but Ruth told her to just wash out already, which was always a possibility. The first week, Asuka counted down to her double period of practical robotics on Thursday and Saturday afternoon. When her Evenstar academic counselor, Mix Garrett, had asked what special skills she had, Asuka volunteered with pride she'd won a prize at the county robotics competition. He had nodded. "We'll sign you up for the advanced class. The important thing is to figure out what you're good at and focus on it, whatever that is. You need to be the best at it, so you stand out." For now, let's assume your specialty will be robotics and engineering more broadly. There will be plenty of spots for engineers on the mission. Great plan. Be the best at something, because that was easy. The class was set up in a large, airy room in the engineering complex with double-height windows and plain, steel-top tables. There were cabinets full of expensive parts, and on each desk was an advanced model New Century 3D printer. She ran her fingers over the machine, unable to keep a grin off her face. Lewis's eyes would have bugged out of his head to see this. Asuka felt the stress of the first week leech off her. Here, at last, was something she could do, something she was good at. Her assigned lab partner was at their table already, fiddling with spare parts. "Lala," she said, holding out her hand. There's an American flag DAR patch on her shoulder, and her DAR tag said, Lala Williams, she, her. Of course she knew who Lala Williams was. Lala was more famous than Trina. She had become a grand master in chess at 10, the youngest ever, before abruptly switching her focus to competitive robotics. Their teacher strode in and switched on the lights, and the sunlight that streamed in through the windows seemed to dull in comparison to the bright bulbs hanging down. She pointed briskly to all the particulars in her DAR tag. Name, Rita Wu. Pronouns, she, they. Title, professor. And background, teaching and private industry. Then she dove right in without further preamble, speaking rapid fire like she had too little time to cover everything they needed to know. All right, we're starting with advanced circuitry. I assume you all know how to build autonomous cars and stuff. If you haven't done that, you should leave this class right now. Asuka's mouth went dry. She knew the principle of how to build one, to that count. She'd started a few times back at the camp, messing around with the basic model builder and DAR, but something had always distracted her a quarter of the way through. A soccer game, or Lewis wanting to play rocketry. Her mom used to admonish her for not finishing things, but now Asuka realized this for a devastating character flaw that extended even to what she loved. She bit her thumb. The thought of packing up her bag and walking out of the classroom while everyone watched was too humiliating. And what would she say to Mick Garrett, who expected this to be the one thing Asuka might excel at? Autonomous vehicles? Lala whispered, rolling her eyes. Does she think we're babies? I know, right? Said Asuka. She shifted in her seat. No sweat. She could have done it if she'd had more time. She would do it this weekend to prove it to herself. If she'd half done it, she could do it. Professor Wu was still talking. She asked them to put together a 30-20 hopper, and everyone was nodding. 40 sets of fingers drummed the tabletop as they took brisk notes on their DAR keyboards. Sweat wicked down the back of Asuka's shirt. A 30-20 what? She whispered. Sorry, I want to make sure I heard her. A hopper. Lala grinned. Awesome, right? Asuka hastily looked up what it was. The models and descriptions were incomprehensible. She had never been good at reading diagrams. Professor Wu ran through a few demonstrations, showing them an enlarged model of a complete hopper. And then she told them to get going. They had 2 hours. Lala seemed oblivious to Asuka's terror. She took charge of their project, asking Asuka to fetch this or that. I've always wanted to do this. In the World Robo Derby last year, we had to build a 45 to 90 looper, but that's way basic. Did you compete? What's your ranking? Asuka thought she might die if her partner learned she'd ever been proud of winning a county competition. Let's do something fun with this. I hate just following rules. Any ideas? Asuka glanced around wildly. She wanted Lala to think she was smart. Out the window, She saw a sprinkler watering the new grass and kids laughing as they dodged around it on their way back from the track. We could spray people? She still wasn't sure what a hopper was. Their machine took shape, and several times Professor Wu walked by and gave an approving nod. Asuka got to use the new Century printer for some of the parts, but all the joy had shriveled up. As the printer hummed and chirped, Asuka wanted to wrap her arms around its warm frame and tell Lewis, "I tried. I just wasn't good enough." Asuka excused herself to go to the bathroom so no one would see her cry. "Are you okay?" Lala asked when she returned. The hopper was almost done. "Oh, yeah," Asuka laughed. "Allergies," she thought. "As soon as this class is over, I will go to Mix Garrett and confess. Admit I'm a mistake. You should get treatment next physical." "Okay, check this out." The hopper was done. It sprang up from the table and, true to its name, began to hop around the class, to the window, to the door, and back again, propelled by a jet of air. And as it did so, it aimed the nozzle of its tiny water gun at other students. Everyone squealed and laughed. "High five," Lala said, whooping and slapping Asuka's palm so hard it left a sting. Asuka hadn't laughed this hard since coming to Even Star. Her spirit lifted. They had made this. "Well done," said Professor Wu, beaming. "Although, next time, please remember water and electronics are not a good combination." "Whatever." Lala rolled her eyes for Asuka's benefit. And Asuka resolved she would try to stick out one more class. She could spend her free time on Sunday morning trying to get ahead in the syllabus so she wasn't so lost. She caught Professor Wu watching her from the front of the class, and she thought for sure the professor could see right through her. But she nodded as Asuka filed out. "Good job today, Asuka." Chapter 20. The Phoenix. 3,980 to 3,981 cycles after launch, 0 to 1 cycles after explosion, C to A shifts. Yue cautioned Asuka about jumping to conclusions. She'd been the one who was so suspicious, but now she seemed desperate to find a cause that didn't involve one of the crew, which Asuka got, but still. "What about Yaz's theory?" Yue asked. Lala had lent Asuka her dar, and instead of a section of the wheel passageway, Asuka stood in a once beautiful park built along a steel blue river. Sections had collapsed into the water where the pilings were rusted through. She could almost believe she was on Earth. "I don't think it was just bots. Listen, I agree with you. I don't want to, but I do. But we're going to need more to go on, including, obviously, the person who did it." Akarasu had settled on one of the pilings. Asuka squinted at it. It watched her back. "Did you know McMahon was a Mackie?" A long, pregnant pause. "Yes." "Oh," said Asuka, deflated. Was she the only one on the ship who didn't know? "Do you think she was involved somehow?" "No," said Yue. "She was pregnant." Dangling at the end of her sentence, "You'd understand if..." She hadn't said it, but Asuka felt the sting of it just the same. "But don't let me bias your investigation. Keep your eyes open for all possibilities." Yue was cautious, but then Asuka recognized she didn't have the support of the other officers. She couldn't afford to throw around wild theories. Asuka thought of her mother telling her, "People say Linda Trembling is not from Earth. If you write Even Star like this, and then run it through an 8 filter, it gives you a number sequence for the date she came here. And have you noticed Even Star has 8 letters?" She pulled one of the rogue microbots out of her pocket, switched it on, and watched it try to burn through her finger. This was not some spooky action at a distance. "How's the course correct stuff going?" Asuka asked. They had only a cycle left. "We'll figure it out." "Asuka, your sleep shift has begun," said Alpha. "Please make your way to your crew quarters." Asuka blew out her cheeks in frustration. No way she could sleep. A Kitasei settled on a rusty light post with a set of red rungs attached to it. She snatched at it, and it fluttered to a higher rung. She grabbed a handhold and began to climb, slowly following the Kitasei higher until she reached a near-invisible hatch in the air. "Open," she said. The hatch opened. The shortest way across the habitat wheel was across the center via the ladders that ran inside its hollow spokes. But because a third of the crew members were pregnant, cross-traffic had slackened, which made the hub an ideal place to sit and think. She climbed through the hatch and found herself scaling scaffolding a story above the ground. She heard workers calling to each other, the whir of autos, and the faint beat of music. The whole city pulsing like an organ. The sky darkened as she ascended until it was night. The Kitasei had disappeared, and Asuka was alone on the scaffolding. Stories above the ground, city lights spread out around her like a map. A gentle bell tolled in Asuka's ear, and Alpha said, "It is A030. Are you heading to bed?" "I'll get around to it, promise," said Asuka. "You also missed your exercise session today. Doesn't almost dying count for anything anymore?" The previous shift, C, was supposed to be Asuka's off shift, meant for relaxation, advanced studies, or exercising, unless she volunteered for extra work just to feel useful. Adrenaline is not a substitute for cardiovascular activity. "Give me a break!" Silence. Then, "I am sorry. I didn't mean to upset you." The AI sounded embarrassed. Asuka passed through a platform, set her feet on it, and stretched her arms. They ached like hell. "But while we're on the subject, you also missed your last therapy appointment," said Alpha. "Totally forgot. I have a reminder set 5 and 10 minutes beforehand. Anyway, why do I need therapy when I have you in my life? Isn't that your primary function?" Haha. Thing was, Asuka preferred talking to Alpha than to another person about her problems, and at least she knew that absolute discretion was coded into Alpha's programming, so she could trust the AI to keep her confidence. But they were required to sit with the crew therapists once a week. No, she wasn't going to talk to her mother. No, she did not want to explain what happened. No, she didn't feel anxious about the fact she still wasn't pregnant. She felt great. Stellar. Everything was fine. "Okay, I have rescheduled you for a new therapy appointment next C shift." Awesome. The psych team probably had her on a watch list. She started climbing again. The closer she got to the center of the wheel, the less faux gravity there was. She could feel herself getting lighter. "My mother was a member of SME," she told Alpha, and she felt panic roll over her, even knowing Alpha couldn't tell anyone. "Would you like to talk about it?" She was so against me going. What if this is why? She stopped and shook her head, even though Alpha wouldn't be able to see the movement. "No, it can't be." "I understand," said Alpha. "If the building were real, it would be windy and cold this far up." She watched the people walking around down below, wondered if they had ever existed in real life. She reached the top of the building, and the ladder ended in the middle of finger-scraping air, with a rope ladder dangling down from a helicopter. The pilot didn't turn around. This close to the hub, her body began to float. She lifted one leg, then the other behind her, and pulled herself up. She climbed into the helicopter, lifted the veil on New York City, and dissolved back into the hub of the spaceship. Her body spun in a lazy circle. Most of the hub was occupied by a donut-shaped tank of water, which surrounded the longer shaft of the Phoenix. The tank emanated a pale blue aura from the light filtering through. Along the sides were cabinets full of genetic material for future use. Trays and trellises of greens were affixed to the curving walls. The microgreens growing sideways gave the air a subtle freshness. Asuka heard sniffling and paused. There was her bunkmate, Gabriella, half hidden by a tank of water. The sedative that Hao Yu had given her earlier must have worn off a while ago. Small globules of tears floated past Asuka's ear. The air was full of them. She felt one brush her face, stray and wet on her chin. Asuka cleared her throat. "Hey, you alright?" Gabriella didn't seem to hear her. Her chin knocked against her chest, and her eyes fixed on nothing. Asuka swam closer and touched Gabriella's shoulder. A few months before launch, they'd each sat down with the designer who had created personalized DARs for everyone. But Gabriella had made her own from scratch. They all knew how to do it. They'd been doing it since they were kids, but some of the crew were savvier than others. You could tell the difference in the richness of the details, the seamlessness of how really real things felt. It was an art, and Gabriella was an artist. They were underwater, and there were colorful fish everywhere. Asuka held on to Gabriella, legs drifting toward seagrass. The sound of water filled her ears. Dim sunlight filtered around her, dappling her arms. They were in a submarine, drifting along the bottom of the ocean floor. And it wasn't filthy ocean, but pure aquamarine teeming with schools of fish and unbleached coral. An octopus banged up against the glass, suckers squashed and obscene. Out there in the water, two small figures in scuba gear swam along, investigating the coral reef teeming with life. Even with the gear on, Asuka was struck by their resemblance to Gabriella. Her sisters, maybe? "This is amazing. You can see my dar?" said Gabriella, voice muffled. "My implant's buggy." Asuka had stopped by the programming mod to get it fixed, but they were all busy with system restoration after the explosion. She'd felt embarrassed for even asking. Gabriella said, "God, I don't know what I'd do without Dar. I couldn't stand it." "It's okay," said Asuka, realizing it was. There was also something nice about seeing into other people's Dar, once she got over the embarrassing intimacy of it. The octopus unsuckered itself and jetted away. A tiny seahorse replaced it, furling and unfurling. Asuka reached out a finger as if she might touch it. Gabriella turned back to the ocean again, where the two figures swam along. "I should go back down. I'm supposed to cook next shift." She covered her face. "You want me to sub for you?" Asuka asked, because it was the only thing she could offer. "No," said Gabriella. "Take your sleep." "Thanks, though." Asuka realized she was still holding Gabriella's shoulder. She let go, and the ocean dissolved into white walls and ventilation hum. And she felt bereft, like someone had turned off music at the crescendo. The fluorescent light was dull and soulless by comparison. Neither of them made any move to go. They sat there, swimming in the soft blue light together. Exhaustion hit. That would be the meds wearing off. She palmed the second pill from her pocket and swallowed it dry. At least she didn't feel nauseous anymore, just the echo of a headache inside her skull. She drifted toward one of the hydroponic stacks and fingered the mizuna tendrils growing there. It cheered her to have something on the phoenix that reminded her of her mother's cooking. Mizuna did well in 0G. It was one of the plants grown on the original ISS back in the day. Ruth says Houston is gone, said Gabriella. Belatedly, Asuka remembered the hurricane. Everything on Earth seemed so unreal when they could only receive bursts of terse strings of curated text from them. Very little warning, for example, that the two biggest nation sponsors of the mission, China and the United States, had been on the verge of war all this time. Wow, said Asuka. They evacuated to Florida, had to airlift their walkie out by helicopter. Very delicate operation. So the United States had wrested control of the mission. She wondered how this was going over with China and its allies. She wondered why Gabriella was more distressed than she was when Gabriella was an American. As far as she knew, most of Gabriella's family was in the Philippines or Japan. A coil of anxiety stirred in Asuka's gut as she considered the potential cost. Japan would be a prime target, given its US bases. She thought of bombs falling on Japan's wooden temples and skyscrapers and burning its forests, and her stomach twisted. And where was her mother? She could reach out and ask her, but that would require an insurmountable amount of energy. Too much baggage to address first. They say it's like what happened to Manila 7 years ago. Water right over the Galveston storm surge barrier. Right, said Asuka, remembering with a lurch that one of Gabriella's sisters had died in that storm. She thought of Kat again and wondered if, in the echo chambers of her mind, she'd be forever watching her tumble away, out of reach. In her anxiety, she tore through the mizuna leaf she'd been stroking. She stuck it in her mouth and remembered the soup Oba-san used to make. Asuka, you should sleep now, said Alpha. Leave me alone, Asuka said to the air. Not you. Sorry, Alpha. Gabriella smiled a tiny smile. Alpha nagging you about bedtime? Don't get cranky with me when you are sleep-deprived tomorrow. Gabriella sighed. I should go. I didn't want anyone to see me cry. Don't worry about it, said Asuka. All those years in school, they'd been so afraid of showing weakness, wanting to prove they were strong enough to withstand anything, except strength could make you brittle. Big enough impact, and you splinter. I miss home, Gabriella whispered. Her words hit like a punch. Asuka thought she was the only one who felt it, because they were never going home. That's what they had signed up for. I had a fight with my mom, said Asuka, right before I left. Oh, I'm so sorry. Is she still alive? Fair question. A lot could happen in a decade of sleep. Yes, Asuka said. She changed. It's complicated. Gabriella put a hand on Asuka's arm, and they were at the bottom of the ocean again. It's okay. You don't have to talk about it. Asuka cleared her throat. How about you? My mom's fine. And Gabriella began to cry again. How could you leave them? Asuka wanted to ask her. How could any of us leave? She wondered where the octopus was. She'd like to see it again. I'm sorry about your sister. Let's not, said Gabriella. Not talk, she meant. Okay. Anyway, Thanks, Asuka. Gabriella broke away and began to kick toward the door. Without turning, she asked, "Do you ever regret coming?" She caught the ladder at the far end, let her body turn in the low, not gravity. Sometimes, Asuka admitted, but only after Gabriella was gone. She reached 2 fingers to her temple and triggered her dar. She should be floating in the sky above Earth, arms outstretched, surrounded by birds. But wherever she looked, puce-colored clouds pressed in. She couldn't see a thing. She dropped dar again, panting as if she'd run 10 miles. "Susie," Yume messaged. "Update from Mission Control. SME is claiming credit. They confirmed they have a sleeper agent on board." Chapter 21. USA, 9 years, 11 months before launch. In the dappled sunlight under the big cottonwood tree, Asuka's mom's face floated bodiless and translucent like a ghost. After Lewis's death, Mom had sworn off dar, and the handheld phone she was using had glitchy but terrible resolution. "How is school? Are you learning?" Asuka slumped against the roots of the tree in the middle of the campus lawn. She had taken refuge here after an incomprehensible chemistry class. She called her mom hoping for some comfort, but she also didn't want to admit that she'd been right. That Even Star was a huge mistake. That Asuka getting in here was a mistake. "Yes," said Asuka, a wobble in her voice. "It's great." Why hadn't anyone ever taught her how to take proper notes? Despite her parents' best efforts, growing up in a camp and moving to Japan had left her with a patchiness in her education that couldn't be filled by just looking things up. She had actually tried calling her father first, but he was somewhere chaotic and could barely hear her over a siren wail and people shouting. He was working in disaster relief and was constantly on the move these days. "I don't even know how I got in," she wailed. "What? Papa? Where are you?" "I'll call you later," he said, but he never did. So she called her mother, even though it was 7 in the morning in Japan. As her mother blinked away sleep, Asuka couldn't help wishing, not for the first time, that she looked more like her. The full, plum lips, graceful brows, the soft envelope of her eyelids. Sometimes she felt certain they resembled each other, but also they had been mistaken before for strangers, in both the United States and Japan. Her mother frowned. "Are you happy?" "I'm learning more than I ever have in my life," Asuka said, which was true. She plucked at the grass with her fingers. "It's just, all the other kids here have already lived amazing lives." In her dar, an American crow settled in the branch above her. "What does that even mean?" "They're 12. Mom's voice, prickly and warm at the same time, settled over her like a familiar scratchy sweater. "You've had a very exciting life yourself." Clearly, her mom didn't pay attention to the enthusiastic media commentary about the world memory champion, the kid with the publication in Nature, and the one who had built a nanocomputer in her garage. "Come home," Mom said, the thread of her voice tugging Asuka back to that farmhouse in the quiet village. "I don't like how this school is making you feel." "I feel fine," croaked Asuka, wondering how she could know. "I'll be okay. I know you don't care about other people's opinions, especially mine, but you sound all, what is it? Like a soft, tasty marshmallow." Despite herself, Asuka burst out laughing. "Tell me, Do they make you run 10 miles every day in your underwear when it's below freezing? Oh my god, no way. Where did you hear that? I went to this meeting yesterday, Mom said. She leaned forward and half her face disappeared. Something funky with the connection. If only she wasn't so stubborn about using the Vizzy. Someone from school invited me. Mom, to Asuka's surprise, had enrolled in the PhD program last spring in ecological engineering. It's called Save Mother Earth. They are fighting to reverse the effects of climate change using modern technology. It's very exciting. Think carbon sequestration on a global scale. Anyway, some of them were saying not good things about Linda Trembling. Things you might not believe, but actually there's a lot of evidence. What are you talking about? Across the yard, a group of candidates walked toward the dining hall, American flags embroidered on their left shoulder, led by pretty blonde Becky McMahon, Junior Olympics swimming champion. Asuka felt a yearning to get up and join them. Never mind, her mother said. Focus on your studies, and remember you can come home anytime. If they try to stop you, we should have a password, like pineapple. Pineapple? Asuka giggled. Yes, it will mean help me, and I will come and get you, no matter what. Mom! Her mother ignored the embarrassment in her voice. Do they have any good environmental science courses? There is nothing more important right now. It will be very useful to know when you go to college. Asuka gaped at her. College? She wasn't going to go to college. Not if she were selected for the mission, which she would be. Somehow. That's why she was here. She was too tired to pick a fight. She should be doing her Mountain of History homework. There's Terraforming 101, I guess. It's like ecological engineering, she said instead. Useful for the mission. She complimented herself on her maturity for not engaging. The old Asuka would have thrown a fit. Said her mom. Their words were passing each other, trains on parallel tracks. Was this how conversations would be? She tried again. Mom, I miss Louis. Thinking how she and her brother had lain side by side in their green tent, trying not to agitate the thick, humid air that gathered at its apex. Louis whispering about Planet X, and what color the soil would be, and how the clouds would look. And if there would be clouds, because maybe there weren't. Until Asuka would say, "Shut up already." Me too. Her mom's voice seemed to have receded to the bottom of a well. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. And if they try to stick a microchip in you, leave immediately and call me. Make sure they don't drug you. If you find yourself losing time or having memory gaps, that's a bad sign. They're not drugging us, Mom. It's a school. Remember, if you are unhappy, you can always come home. You haven't signed a contract. You don't have to do the mission. So she had heard her earlier after all. I want to go. You think you do, said Mom, frowning. She reached out like she was trying to touch Asuka's shoulder. But you don't have to hold yourself to promises you make yourself now, okay? You can do anything you want. This is what I want. The clouds rolled over and cloaked the sun, and Asuka pulled her jacket closer around her. She stood and brushed off the bits of grass and dirt from her knees. No one knows what they want at your age. Even Louis didn't know, said Mom. And Asuka felt fire flare up in her against her will. How could she say that about Louis? She let her voice go cold. Let's talk about this later, okay? I've got to go to dinner. Bye. I love you, her mom said. And Asuka cut the connection, thinking she couldn't fail, because her mother was wrong. She would show her. Chapter 22. The Phoenix. 3,981 cycles after launch, 1 cycle after the explosion. A to B shift. Asuka woke at the end of A shift after a fitful sleep, panicked and sweating. She'd spent too many hours before that trawling through the public feed, looking for some clue. Anything. Nothing. The thing that gave her hope, which was a terrible thought, she should want to solve this. But was she thinking? She was thinking about her mother. No, she was not thinking about her mother. Was that SME had offered no explanation for how they might have done it, much less infect Yaz's bots from an unfathomable distance away. And then other groups began claiming credit for it too. So, there it was. A big, massive fatberg. Mission Control still thinks SME is most likely, Yume said. But still. Asuka wrote and deleted several one-sentence messages to her mother, demanding answers in all caps, calling her a terrorist, telling her that they should never talk again. She sent none of them. She couldn't bring herself to read the messages she'd received, particularly not the one she'd gotten right after the explosion. If she were honest with herself, it was no longer anger. It was fear. Because what if the message confirmed the very thing Mission Control was saying? There was no way. And yet, she couldn't bear it. She went to breakfast late and taut as the string of a kite, Lewis not letting her hold the spool as usual because it was his kite. God, her head hurt. Gabriella was in the rec mod alone after morning rush, drinking tea and watching something in her dar. Shouldn't you be going to sleep? Asuka asked her. Gabriella handed her a covered plate. Okay, Alpha. She smiled to show she didn't mean it. I've been stress baking. Saved this for my bunkie. Oh, wow, said Asuka, realizing in horror she might cry. It was just a really thoughtful thing to do. The scent of sweet carbohydrates and butter wafted from what looked like some kind of soft bun. Except there was no butter, and the flour was probably made out of crickets or something. Whatever. She didn't need to know. It smelled amazing. Hey, said Gabriella, punching her in the arm. It might be terrible. Asuka took a bite. Umami and salty and sweet filled her mouth, like a Japanese curry bread. It's amazing. Gabriella was regarding her with a pained expression, but then she smiled again, and Asuka was left to wonder if she'd imagined it. Did you fix the issues with your implant? She scratched her eyebrow as Asuka described the problem. That's so weird. I haven't seen that before. Asuka hesitated, but then, because Gabriella was so nice, asked if she'd be willing to take a look. Mortio! Mysterious implant glitch sounds like a great distraction. Now? No rush, lied Asuka, even though inside she was screaming, yes, please, yes. Gabriella was clearly exhausted. I have to get to work anyway. She had meant to spend her work shift skulking around the dining mod searching for something she'd missed, but she had job requests in her queue. One of the ship systems and maintenance team members was out, morning sickness, and they had to fix the toilet's automatic flusher. The vice captains were requesting food be brought to the bridge, and the bot shop put in a request for help, which turned out to be Lala trying to find the misplaced drill again. You don't have other drills? Lala bit the cuticle of one of her nails. Vice Captain is going to rip me a new one if she finds out I let someone borrow it. Pretty please, Susie? She seemed genuinely stressed about it, so Asuka promised to look again, with no intention of doing so. Alpha, why don't you just track where all the tools are? Asuka asked. I can't see anything that isn't a smart object, Alpha said. The drill isn't smart? It's a drill. I don't know what to tell you. I am not God. I am a very clever program residing in a quantum processor. But I would need a lot more power to know where every little thing on this ship is. Maybe Ag-A? Lala suggested via DAR message. Red now thinks he saw it there. Red was a trans man from Germany who worked in ship systems and maintenance and had an unusual enthusiasm for gunked-up air scrubbers and shower drains. It wasn't in Ag-A, of course. She dismissed the job and resolutely ignored the rest in her queue, and realized she was standing in the eam again, staring at the heavy, bright red handle of the exterior airlock door. Asuka stepped closer. She considered the corners of the room. Cameras and sensors were affixed to the ceiling so the ship maintenance team could support spacewalk deployment from the adjacent module. But they weren't on otherwise. Asuka stood on her tiptoes and examined the glass eye, then the rest of the empty chamber, considering angles. We can't keep meeting like this. Someone will think we did it. Asuka jumped. Yaz leaned in the frame of the passageway, both amused and impatient. You were starting to freak out my team. She nodded to the cluster of cameras. I reset it so the sensors go off if anyone gets too close. Sorry. Asuka fidgeted in embarrassment. Yaz crossed her arms. What should I tell them? That I spotted a brown pelican? The corner of Yaz's lips turned up just a millimeter. She gave the electronic eye a thumbs up and gestured to cut the feed. Yaz indicated the sensors with a long tapered finger. So, visual, audio, and infrared, all triggered when we're deploying bots or activating the exterior airlock. Yaz strode to a smaller hatch set in the wall, and before you ask, I measured it last cycle. A person couldn't have squeezed down the bot chute. She opened it so Asuka could see for herself. So, let's say you did it. I didn't. Relax. How would you? Asuka considered. She knew the exterior of the Phoenix better than most. It would have been impossible to sneak out on an unauthorized spacewalk. She reached out and grabbed one of the helmets hanging on the wall. During an authorized mission. While the entire maintenance team was watching? Asuka turned the helmet over. Then she pulled up the only visual they had of the black object from the exterior cameras. It could have been anything. An unidentifiable black smear. Which is why Captain McMahon had ordered a spacewalk to investigate. Unusually dirty resolution, observed Yaz, turning the image this way and that. Asuka braced herself, then pulled up the visual from her suit. She heard herself propose the race, Cat accepting. Again, Cat scampered off, faster than Asuka even with the toolkit strapped to her chest. Those toolkits were cumbersome. When Asuka was doing a job, she preferred to remove and anchor it to the ship so she could move better. Cat's arms were longer, so she didn't have that problem, which is why Cat had grabbed the toolkit. Asuka's gloves came down in her field of view, climbing the ladder. They heard glee in Cat's voice as she closed in on their destination. Sweat prickled Asuka's palms. If only she hadn't been so slow, she'd have... What? And yet, if she had been faster, maybe she could have, well... something, Kat said. Where did you say it was, Yingyue? Hang on, I'm caught on something. Okay, but I'm telling you. Then a bright flash as Asuka glanced over, and a piece of hull hurtled toward her, complete loss of visual. Asuka clenched her hands. What was she saying? Yaz stretched her hips. She was at the stage of pregnancy where any standing position was awkward. Asuka replayed the clip again, then switched to the feed from Kat's suit. They watched it multiple times to be sure. There was no object in Kat's visual. Did you see it when you were out there? Yaz asked. Asuka shook her head. I didn't get there in time, but it was on the exterior cams. How could it not be there? She flexed her fingers, gloved in smart fabric. What if... She stopped. What if there was never a box, and all we saw was an augmentation? Dar doesn't work outside, so when she got there, she wouldn't have seen it. If that were the case, where was the bomb? Asuka looked back at the suits again, at the neat rows of boots and gloves and gleaming helmets. She didn't want to say her next thought out loud. It was too horrible. What if it was on Kat? Inside her suit? Yaz grimaced. You think Kat did this intentionally? She pulled up the exterior feed, slowing it down till it crawled millisecond by excruciating millisecond through Kat's last moments. Asuka put her knuckle in her mouth and bit down. She didn't want to watch it. She had to. There was a black object, visible on the exterior camera, and Kat looking around for the thing she couldn't see. As she leaned in close to the side of the Phoenix, the large toolkit strapped to her chest touched the ship. The magnets on the outside of the kit stuck to the hull. Unaware at first, Kat continued feeling around with her fingers trying to find the anomaly. Then, realizing she had snagged, she tried to yank free. When there was a small flash, then a much bigger one, and the entire dining mod exploded outward. Shit, Asuka said, yanking her hand out of her mouth. She'd bitten through the glove. The toolkits. She stared at the 4 remaining spare kits standing on their sides in the cabinet, and the empty space for the 5th. She couldn't have known, Asuka said. Kat, who had been moping about breaking her ugly ceramic cat, who had insisted on telling her the entire plot of entertainment sims Asuka had absolutely zero interest in, who loved dramas, the cornier the better, who said, "This is more than the opportunity of a lifetime, it's the opportunity of all the lives ever lived on Earth." Who do you think you are? Asuka had thought. Captain Kirk? Why not? Said Yaz, rubbing her stomach again. Oi, stop kicking my kidneys. Asuka didn't understand how Yaz could be so calm. She believed in the mission. Yaz rubbed her hair stubble. You think one of the Ready crew stuck it on her? Or what? She got unlucky and grabbed the wrong kit? Unless the spare toolkits hung in a neat row on the wall. Careful, Asuka, said Alpha, sounding more worried than usual. Asuka grabbed the closest kit. Each one was designed with 2 rows of tools, one on each side, so that the tools could individually be removed and reinserted through loops. The tools were attached to the kit by a long wire, so they couldn't float away if dropped outside. A zipper ran around the middle, so you could undo the wires and switch out tools. Wait, said Yaz. Asuka heard her take a step back. Her voice was sharp. Stop, Susie. Asuka. She unzipped the toolkit and opened it gently like a butterfly. The inside was packed with explosives. Put it down on the floor, said Yaz in a quiet voice. Very slowly. Chapter 23. The gestation of a cuckoo was typically shorter than its nestmates, leading it to hatch earlier. At that point, the parent would begin to feed the cuckoo chick. The cuckoo would grow, and once strong enough, when its foster parents were away, it would push the other unhatched eggs out of the nest, enabling it to claim all of the food for itself. Not quite as brutal, at least, as the honey guide, which would stab the other chicks to death as they hatched. All the while, the foster parents would continue to feed it, answering its demanding cries even after it had outgrown them. Chapter 24. The Phoenix. 3,981 cycles after launch, 1 cycle after the explosion, B shift. Asuka set the kit down with extraordinary care. It took all her concentration not to drop it, particularly given that her hands were shaking so badly, it was a wonder her finger bones weren't rattling. "Is everything okay?" Alpha asked, unable to see anything beyond the movements of her body and the way she was, any moment going to have a heart attack or something. "Tell me, what is happening?" "Okay, now, back away," said Yaz. The air was glue, and Asuka was swimming through it. She backed up until she felt Yaz grip her shoulder. They stood at the back of a large, open airplane hangar, a fighter jet parked about 20 meters away. The wall of the module was now a bright red painted line across the ground, and in front of that line, on the rough concrete floor, sat the toolkit, which was actually a bomb. A karasu perched on top of it. In a single, decisive motion, Yaz yanked her back, through a small door behind them. The door slammed shut. Then Yaz's hand was gone, and they were in the adjacent module. "Alpha, seal and remove all atmosphere from that module, now." In the passageway, Yaz stood with her eyes closed. There was movement beneath the lids. Her mouth tightened. Then her eyes snapped open, and she loomed over Asuka, fury plain. "What the actual fuck is wrong with you? You could have gotten us all killed. If you've got a death wish, happy travels, but don't take me with you." Asuka wanted to melt right into the air duct. Humiliation rose inside her in a wave so strong she gagged on it. Because Yaz was right. Replaying it in her mind, she realized how ridiculous she'd been, trying to be the hero, and she could have blown up the entire ship. Yaz pushed into the control room. She left Asuka in the passageway, pressing the heels of her palms against her cheeks, trying to erase the heat. "Are you all right, Asuka?" Alpha asked. "I'm here for you, if you want to talk about it." "I don't," said Asuka. She couldn't stay in the hall, like a child hiding in her bedroom. No way to slink off and sulk on the ship, because sooner or later she'd have to face Yaz again. Better to apologize now. So she squared her shoulders and entered the control room. But Yaz was already in motion, issuing orders. They'd pumped the atmosphere out of the EAM and were readying a big bot, Daffodil, to go in and take the toolkits apart. Yaz brushed off her words with a grunt, and Asuka stood there, wanting so badly to help, and feeling completely, utterly useless. Yume came in from the wheel, followed by AM and 2 other officers on their heels. "What's going on?" AM wanted to know. "Captain," Yaz said, "you shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." "I seem to recall this was my team only a cycle ago. Still is, in fact," said Yume, a low warning in her voice. Strange to see Yume and Yaz at odds. They had been close since final training and spent many of their off-shift hours playing sim games and studying together. Something unspoken passed between them now, and then Yume turned away. releasing Yaz from her gaze, seizing on Asuka instead. "Susie, I'd like a full report." "Wait, not here." AM started to follow, but Yingyue raised a splayed hand, not quite touching their chest. "Last I checked, we're off course, and you're supposed to be working on it." They crossed their arms. "As your new first vice captain, don't I have a right to hear this?" "We all do," added Valentina, the Russian vice captain for ship systems and maintenance, who liked to call Asuka in to clean up the toilet overflow issues. "I need you all to clear out right now," snapped Yaz. "She can't order us around like that," Valentina started to say, but Yingyue was already moving to the door. She grabbed Asuka and pulled her along, and the officers were forced to follow if they wanted to learn anything. They walked down the aisle of a moving train, rice fields just a green blur out the windows on either side, passed through the door at the end of the car, and they were in a station. Through another door, and another, and they were in a small house with dark wooden floors. Yingyue let go, and they stood in a stuffy, dark module lit with emergency lights. Shadows gathered like cobwebs around Spartan, empty white cribs. There was a pile of rumpled blankets on the floor, evidence of recent trysts. The nursery mod was a convenient place for privacy on a ship with little of it, except that it wasn't actively in use, and therefore overly warm. Despite the cold of space, heat loss by radiation was slow, and the ship insulation was good enough that the climate controls were constantly deployed to shed heat. Yingyue stooped and grasped at one of the blankets. Asuka intercepted and handed it to her. Yingyue began absently to fold it. She stared off at nothing with eyes underlined by the dark smudges of sleep deprivation. "Well," said AM. "Here we all are." Asuka glanced at Yingyue, uncertain if she should begin. "Come on! What's with the secrecy?" Valentina added. "Does it have anything to do with the bombing in Fuzhou?" And a third said, "Japan's on the American side." "Shut up, all of you!" It was the first time Asuka had ever heard Yingyue raise her voice, and it was surprisingly effective. They all fell silent. Yingyue pinched the bridge of her nose, then sank into a rocking chair. "AM can stay. Everyone else out, except Asuka. No discussion. Out!" And the others complied, though they grumbled about it. When they were gone, Yingyue nudged a chair over in AM's direction. "We need to figure out a way to work together." "I think I've been pretty fucking cooperative," said AM, taking the seat after the briefest of hesitations. "Considering." Asuka leaned against a crib, wiping sweat from her hairline with her sleeve. "You're on the wrong side of history, if you believe that." "It's not what I believe, it's what I know." "What you know." Yingyue let out a whiff of air that sounded like, "Ha! You don't know as much as you think you do." It dawned on Asuka that they were not talking about the bomb at all. "I didn't want to waste our precious time on this, but it seems like we have to," said Yingyue. "So, do we have a problem?" AM jumped up and jabbed a finger in Yingyue's face. "Yes. My problem is you shouldn't even be the captain right now after you went behind Tony's back like a fucking coward." Tony was what friends sometimes called Becky McMahon, short for automaton, on account of her extraordinary discipline. Everyone else usually called her McMahon, as if the formality of the last name might create some buffer between them and her. She was the sort of person who ran precise 7-minute miles, no faster, no slower, who wouldn't hesitate to elbow you if you were in the way of that. Not that you could ever prove it was intentional. AM was still going. But if you want us to follow you, you'd better wake the fuck up and fucking lead. Own the title. And also, while we're at it, trust is a two-way street, you know? You keep telling me to trust you, but you don't trust me. If you would tell me what's going on, maybe I could even fucking help you. Asuka cleared her throat. They both seemed to suddenly remember she was there. Yume took advantage of the interruption to master herself. There were bright pink spots on her cheeks. Then, after a minute, she said, "Okay, that was fair. 75% of it, anyway." AM sank back into their chair and buried their face in their hands. "I'm sorry about Becky." A muffled laugh bubbled up. "Thank you," they said. "You know, you're the first person to say that. Guess I was her only real friend." Which I get. She was a fucking pain in the ass. I didn't even like her half the time. Yume chuckled too. "Listen, I'll tell you everything." She gave AM a quick summary from Mission Control's suspicions, the missing records in the shop, the rogue bots, and the bombs that they had found. AM was silent as they digested it all. Ship noises infiltrated the mod, a loud debate as two people walked by in the passageway about which made the better door game, basketball or cricket, the rattle of a water pipe that should be inspected. "I'll kill them," AM said. "What?" asked Yume. AM turned and cut Asuka with a scalpel-like gleam in their dark brown eyes. "Who do you think did this?" Asuka tugged on her ponytail. I'm not sure yet. I think it was someone who has done a spacewalk, familiar with the protocol, and who knew we were doing the spacewalk, that we had taken the bait." She pulled up her list, which was a third of the crew. Besides the captain, only the bots and drones operations team knew about this mission. Yume made an indignant noise, like of course they'd blame Yume's old squad. Asuka held up a finger. "Actually, no. Alpha put out a call to all spacewalk certified crew." She thought of poor Kat, who always jumped at the chance to do a spacewalk, same as Asuka. "You forgot to include someone who believes in that SME shit," said AM. "That has to narrow it, right? If someone on board is working for FME, I assume they've kept those views to themselves," Yume said. "The way Becky didn't go around broadcasting she was a Mackie." AM dismissed this. Mac was more cultural than belief for her, which felt thin as hell. And anyway, AM wasn't American, so what did she understand about Mac? But Asuka decided to let it go. None of the groups that claimed responsibility have been able to explain how they did it, or what happened. "Well then, we haven't narrated much at all. It could even have been one of you." AM pursed their lips. "I didn't do it," said Asuka. "Me neither," said Yume. "Great, we'll form a club." AM squinted at Asuka's list. "It definitely wasn't Chigozie or Soma." "Why not?" said Yume. "We shouldn't eliminate anyone at this point just because they're friends. We all know each other. We grew up together." AM rolled their eyes. "Well then, here's another theory. We've got a world war that just happened to start same time as the explosion. Maybe that's not a coincidence. What if your government ordered one of your people to remove Tony from command?" "One of my people?" "Everyone knows the Chinese were upset you weren't captain." Yume gaped at them. We had a legitimate issue with the fact China wasn't being treated as an equal sponsor after contributing the same amount of funding as America did to the mission." "I'm not saying you did it," said AM. But you said we can't eliminate anyone out of personal feelings. So, Asuka understood why Yue would be offended. She also didn't disagree that they had to consider all possibilities. She tried to steer back to the original topic. The problem is, we don't even know what they were trying to achieve with all this. Were they trying to kill Becky? Or the entire crew? I can see you are stressed. Shall I tell you about the navigation capabilities of the Manx Shearwater? Alpha suggested. Not now. She began to stuff her fears into the box, one by one. Well, thank you for bringing me in, said AM. I better get back to work, but please keep me updated. Distantly, Asuka heard the airlock shut. She thought of the late captain and Lala telling her darkly she was no good for the mission. Of the 3 people who died, she seemed to have the most enemies. And what was she doing in the dining mod in the first place? Becky McMahon had been the sort of perfect golden child, with a perky ponytail and dimples when she smiled, deceptively angelic looking. The teachers loved her anyway. Lala wasn't sorry Becky was dead. Yue wasn't either. Who knew what other enemies she had? What are you thinking, Susie? Yue asked. And Asuka jumped. She thought Yue had left with AM, but no, she was still sitting there, watching Asuka, her face shadowed in the dim light. A message appeared from Yaz. She'd successfully deactivated the bombs. Did their alt detective want to come and take a look? Chapter 25. USA, 9 years, 10 months before launch. The leaves of the cottonwood tree in the middle of the quad turned brilliant amber and flame. Then, overnight, they dropped to the ground, a thick carpet of dry husks, brown and brittle beneath their shoes. Even so, the weather was unseasonably warm and wet, as if there was such a thing as unseasonable anymore. And miraculously, Asuka continued to hang on. Not miraculously. It was thanks in no small part to her friends, who shared notes and took the time to explain things to her and made sure she didn't oversleep for her classes. But one day, in robotics class, Lala didn't show, and Asuka was left to struggle through the exercise of designing and printing a temperature-sensing nanobot alone. She was only halfway done by the time the class ended. Professor Wu stood over her, while Asuka mumbled an incoherent explanation of her design. I admit, I'm not sure what you're trying to do here, the professor said. Finish it this weekend. I'll have to mark you incomplete until you do. Crushed, Asuka gathered her belongings and slinked out of class. She texted Lala a few times, trying not to make it sound like an accusation. Where were you? Everything okay? But nothing. Hours later, in the grand old wood-paneled dining hall, she and Trina ran into Lala, sporting a long, medicated skin patch across half her face, and a foul expression that matched that of the elderly person half buried under a magnificent ginger cat in the oil painting behind her. Hey, Asuka said. What happened to you? Lala tore the soft part of a crusted roll and placed it in her mouth. America happened. Asuka slid onto the bench across from Lala, ignoring Trina's sour expression. Trina didn't like Lala. They were both candidates for the United States, so Trina said they couldn't be friends, even though the United States had 5 reserved spots. It didn't help that Lala made fun of Trina's strategy of selfies and near-live posting about even-star life. America, said Trina. That's funny. Is it? I mean, we're candidates for the US seat, so yeah, said Trina. You're right. It is funny. Ha ha ha. Then Lala's face snapped up to Trina, suddenly afraid. Don't post that, please. Trina's fingers stilled. Trina won't post anything, Asuka said, shooting Trina a warning look. She liked her roommate, but their lack of filter was sometimes exhausting. Trina held up their hands in peace and exaggerated, swiping right to clear their feed. Are you okay though? Lala gave her a thumbs up. Just can't wait to get off this rock. She shoveled a spoonful of mashed potatoes into her mouth, then grimaced in pain. Sensing the need to change the subject, Asuka said, Robotics was terrible today. I'm pretty sure Professor Wu wanted to strangle me. Silence while Lala chewed another piece of bread. She swallowed, then said, Look, don't take this the wrong way, but I think I'd like to eat by myself right now. I don't have the bandwidth to help you with your problems. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. Face burning, Asuka stood. She shoved the rest of her falafel in her mouth and went to dump her tray. She's kind of much, sometimes, Trina said, as they scraped their plates into the compost bin. You were just trying to be nice. It's fine, Asuka said. I have my first sim team scheduled in half an hour anyway. She left the dining hall. In the gathering dusk, the old cottonwood tree in the middle of the lawn loomed monstrous and huge. An orange moon rose through its branches. She trudged across campus past the engineering complex to the big concrete sim building near the lake. Did something happen to Lala? She asked Mickey. Heard she was in a fight. Mickey's words floated white and glowing in front of her. What? Hard to imagine nerdy Lala getting into a fight with anyone. A brief image of Mickey shrugging flashed across her vision. Gambatti with them. Asuka tightened her scarf against the cool autumn air. Anxiety over her first sim team session began to eclipse any thoughts of Lala. The kids who had already done it were badly shaken, though they refused to say why. One kid in the dorm was almost catatonic and dropped out a few days after. No team so far had scored more than 5 out of 10. It would be Asuka's luck if this tanked her out of the program. 9 other kids, her sim teammates, were waiting outside the gym. To her horror, one of them was Ruth, whom she had been avoiding for weeks after an acidic exchange of words following chemistry class that culminated in Asuka mobbing her with a swarm of real starlings, which wasn't exactly mature, but she was 12 and allowed to act like it sometimes, right? Ruth seemed too nervous to fight. She shivered and stamped her feet. You guys hear what happened to Lala and Winnie? Someone said. Yeah, said Ruth. Terrible. They got into a fight? Asuka said tentatively. Embarrassed she was the last to know about her friend, Ruth snorted. If you want to call getting jumped by some Mackies getting into a fight. Asuka froze. What? Yeah. Fortunately, Winnie was coming back from cricket scrimmage, and she had her bat. Clocked one of them bad enough to send him to the hospital, and then some delivery worker jumped off his bike and pulled a gun on the guys. Whoa, Asuka said. Racist fucks, Ruth concluded. Asuka started to compose a message to Lala, but before she could figure out what to say, the black metal door opened, and a teacher in a navy blue even star polo gestured for them to come in. The building was constructed like a giant warehouse, 3 stories high and unfinished inside. She caught an acrid whiff of pee and sweat. In the center of the room was a large metal pod, like a submarine. Ruth sidled up to Asuka. "It's okay if you're scared, Killdeer." "Nah, I'm looking forward to this," lied Asuka. The teacher's DAR tag confirmed this was J. Lee, the woman who oversaw the STEM program and co-led the Evenstar transgender mentorship program. Her nose was crooked, and she exuded coolness from the tips of her dangling skull earrings to her chocolate donut socks. "Call me Coach Lee," she told them. "I've been charged with evaluating how you do under pressure and teaching you ways to deal with it. I'll be working with you each month. During the exercise, you'll need to keep your vizies on full opacity." A few people reached up to make the adjustment to their DAR headgear. "Your vizzy is older than you are," muttered Ruth. Asuka was still using Lewis's old headgear, even though they'd all been given new ones when they arrived. "If you remove your vizies at any time, you will be disqualified and receive a 0. Coach Lee paused, checking to make sure they were all paying attention. They were. "Don't be scared. Good luck." They filed inside the chamber, and the door shut behind them. They were in a medium-sized room with a soft green carpet, a bureau, a desk with a chair, a bookshelf of old moldering volumes, large plants along one wall, and a bed. On one wall were portholes, which gave the impression they were on a ship. A sinking ship. "What the hell?" said Ruth, standing right next to Asuka. They looked down at their feet. Cold water was seeping in under the door. Asuka's socks were already soaked. Panic began to rise. "Wait, this is real," said another, one of the Canadian reps. "I can't swim." A memory of treading water, ash falling, of Lewis sinking down. Asuka's heart hammered in her chest. No, this wasn't a pool. The water wasn't so deep. They wouldn't put them in danger. She felt faint. "You okay?" Ruth asked. "Your face is kinda pasty." Asuka shut her eyes and thought of her mom's jewelry box, that handful of pearls. She began to count them. 1, 2, 3. She got to 10 and slammed the lid down. "I'm fine." She went straight to the door and tried it. Locked, of course. "Find something to open the door," she told the others. There was a desk in the corner. She checked all the drawers, a paperclip, a diary, a ballpoint pen. She went back to the door with the paperclip and the pen and picked the lock without success. The water was at their ankles. There was a decorative curtain hanging around the window. She ripped it down and stuck it under the door to try to slow the water. "That's not going to work," Ruth said. She was rifling through a bookshelf. As she went through each book, she dropped it on the floor, heedless of the water. "What are you doing?" Asuka asked. "I don't know," she said. "If this were a game, there'd be something hidden in one of these, like a key." Some of the other kids were battering the door with their fists. The water was up to their knees. "Stop that! Start searching the room," Asuka told them. No one listened. Ruth waded up and began shoving them toward different parts of the room. "You? Check that table. Check the plants. Check the closet." The kid who couldn't swim was trying to climb the bookshelf. She was sobbing. "It's a simulation," Asuka told her. "It's real water, isn't it?" Asuka tried battering the doorknob with a chair. No luck. The water was at her waist. She thought of her mother's arms, holding her, counted again until she was okay. Then she studied the room again. There, set in the ceiling, was an air vent, big enough to crawl through. She nearly missed it because it was partially behind the bookshelf. She shoved the bookshelf aside. Ruth ran over and helped her move the bureau under it. The water was now shoulder high. Kids were shouting for help. "Don't take your vizzy off!" Ruth shouted at one as she helped boost Asuka on top of the bureau. Asuka used the paper clip she'd taken from the desk drawer and began to painstakingly unscrew the vent. She knew they were on the right track when the screws turned easily. Ruth swam over, towing the girl who couldn't swim, who was clinging to her neck with locked arms. "If they find out I can't swim, they'll expel me," she was saying. "Chill," said Ruth. "You don't need to swim in space." The cover of the vent detached, and Asuka hoisted the girl up. Everyone was crowding now, wanting to go next. They got them through, one by one. The water was nearly to the duct. It was freezing. They had to press their faces to the ceiling to get air. Asuka thought, "Is this how it was for Lewis when—" She pushed the thought down. "This whole thing is kind of fucked up, isn't it?" said Ruth. "Get in," Asuka said, pointing toward the vent. "You going to make it?" "I'll make it." She pushed Ruth closer to the vent. She didn't mention the weird tug she felt to stay there in the water, until there was nothing left but to let it fill her lungs. It was like her shoes were full of cement, and her heart, too. "Don't underestimate me," as she was talking to herself, not to Ruth. "Chill, dear." Ruth laughed, and then coughed as she inhaled some water. She pulled herself up into the ceiling. "Good thing I've been doing bench presses." Her pink prosthetic leg dangled, and Asuka cupped the plastic calf and foot and gave her a boost. The water lapped the ceiling, but Asuka felt so heavy, so tired, she couldn't move her arms to pull herself up. Out of the periphery of her vision, she thought she saw Lewis struggling in the water, but no, it was the chair bobbing against the ceiling. "You just gonna give up?" she thought she heard Lewis say. Never. Her terror was white noise, but she pulled herself up into the vent. She gulped air, but she was okay. She tumbled out of the vent onto a thick mat. Coach Lee congratulated them for getting everyone out, but Asuka's ears were ringing too much to hear. The second she could, she was out of there, stumbling around the side of the building, where she vomited against the concrete wall. "Are you okay?" Ruth had followed her. Asuka could feel the adrenaline now in her veins. She shivered. "You need a hot shower." "It's fine," said Asuka. "You were kind of amazing." She hadn't expected a compliment from Ruth. She didn't know what to say. "I was scared shitless," Ruth added. "Me too." "Sure fooled me." And Asuka burst into tears, like a storm breaking through a levee. Ruth didn't ask her why or make fun of her. She rubbed her back, and when Asuka was done, she said, "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone." And then she walked Asuka home, talking about her wacky, hilarious aunt who had helped her apply to Evenstar, and how she missed her dad's and soft brioche French toast on Sunday mornings. "I can't believe we have to do this every month," said Ruth, before they separated to go to their respective dorms. But Asuka realized she wasn't dreading it. She felt, instead, that old mulish defiance rising in her. They thought they could freak her out, but she'd beat them, and she would beat them again. She'd been through the worst possible things already in real life. Make-believe couldn't hurt her. It was only later, after Asuka took a hot shower and remembered to send a message to Lala that got no reply, that she sat down at her desk and checked the updated Sim team rankings. 9 out of 10. And she thought, well, shit. Surviving. That's what she was good at. Chapter 26. The Phoenix. 3,981 cycles after launch, 1 cycle after the explosion, B-shift. If there was any residual anger in Yaz's face, Asuka couldn't find it. Apparently, her temper burned through quickly and completely. She was surprised to see Lala waiting in the passageway with Yaz. Though it made sense. Of course, a bot engineer would be the closest to the ship's expert on dismantling bombs. Lala grinned at Asuka like someone had offered her a rare and bloody steak. "Here we go again, eh?" "We're repressurizing now," Yaz told them. "And you're sure it's safe?" Yingyue asked. Daffodil removed all incendiary material. "That's my baby," said Yingyue. Alpha informed them the module was safe for entry. Asuka and Lala entered practically on tiptoe anyway, because they were, after all, dealing with bombs. And who knew what Alpha knew about that? Sweat slid down the back of Asuka's shirt. "I couldn't find your drill, by the way," Asuka said, because she felt like she might scream if one of them didn't say something. Lala darted a glance at the cameras. "Yeah, don't worry about that." She knelt and nudged the tangle of wires and snipped ends with her finger. They both braced themselves. Nothing happened. Lala seemed to accept this as good enough for an all-clear and began examining the bomb. Asuka checked one of the others, wishing she could tell if a bomb was safe to handle. She'd have to have faith in Yaz's team. They piled everything into crates and carried it all to the nursery mod for further examination away from the nosy crew. "Oh, this old place," Lala smiled in recognition. "You want in?" She offered Asuka an unlit match between her fingers. Asuka reached for it, and it burst into flame and disappeared. And they stood in the living room of a sunny brownstone with large windows facing out to a residential street. Soft rose-colored walls and framed family photos. A big tree out front full of yellowing leaves. "Welcome to the Williams' house." Lala spread her arms to capture it all. "My dad'll be home from work any minute with some killer Szechuan food from our favorite place down the street." She looked around again, and her smile faded. "Anyway, yeah." They set the deactivated bombs on an antique wooden table. Asuka started to remove her alt multi-tool from her waistband, but Lala was already emptying a whole bag of tools on the surface between them. They began carefully pulling the first 2 toolkits apart into their components. "Winnie saved my life once," Lala remarked. Her voice wobbled only a little. "I wish I could have returned the favor." Winnie had been supremely driven, the type to wake up at 5 and get in more than twice her quota of exercise before breakfast. The type who started with the hardest homework first and churned through everything from comparative constitutional law to thermodynamics like it was nothing. Not like Ruth and Asuka, who had to bribe themselves with clandestine sweets to get through their problem sets. Asuka glanced over at Lala, who was hugging herself. She dropped her gaze. This was her moment to say the things she should have said years ago. "Lala, Except what? What could she say? Time had already warped things. The right words had crumbled into dust by now. She could have done something then, and she hadn't. In the aftermath, she'd been so swept up in her new friendship with Ruth, she'd never gone beyond a sympathetic, generic, "How are you doing?" She'd let the space grow between them. "I'm sorry." Lala cleared her throat. "Don't know what you're even talking about." The way she said it, though, she knew. She straightened. "Alpha, Jesus, turn down the temperature, please." It's sticky in here. And lights up too. What are we doing here working in the dark? Of course, Lala. So, what are we looking at? Asuka asked. Lala examined the components. She ripped a block of something encased in plastic out of the device. Here is the incendiary material. She hummed and examined the casing more closely. Right before the explosion, Alpha had postponed some people's mealtimes because of a sensor issue, Asuka said. People figured it was just the sensors glitching again, but what if there was an actual leak? Do you think that might have anything to do with this? Lala chewed the cuticle of her pinky, considering. Could be. Outside the brownstone window, a karasu began to caw from the branch of an old beech tree. It watched them. Lala picked through the wires. This looked like a receiver for remote control. She and Asuka looked at each other. The bombs were proof enough, but here was additional evidence this wasn't the work of some faraway organization. One of the crew had stood there and pulled the trigger. Asuka shivered, despite the warmth of the nursery. Any idea what the range of the trigger was? Lala leaned over and detached a piece of wire. This is a radio transmitter, which makes sense, since DAR doesn't work great outside. She conferred with Alpha a minute, then said, maybe a couple modules. So they have to have been standing near the dining mod. Asuka chewed her lip. That included kitchen, medical, the exercise mod, Ag A and Ag B, crew quarters C and D, bot shop, and the sanitation mod. But ruled out the bot and drones crew. The drone ops mod was a quarter of the wheel away from the dining mod. That still left a long list of possible crew. Did anyone leave the drone ops mod during the last spacewalk? She asked Yue. Just yes. She went to the clinic because she was having back pain. In the middle of a mission? Like I said, it was bad. She couldn't concentrate, but she came right back after the explosion to help. Car outside began to honk. It was stuck behind an automated delivery truck. So Yaz would have been in range during the explosion. Cold? Lala asked. Asuka's arms were covered in goosebumps. It doesn't mean anything, Asuka told herself. 22 other crew could have done it. She forced herself to bend over the table and resume pulling the device to pieces. So, is it weird for you that Ruth and I are together? The question caught Asuka off guard. Their heads were a whisper apart, Lala's voice just a murmur, as if she were afraid to wake a ghost. No. Once upon a time, a kid who didn't get along with Asuka didn't have a chance with Ruth. She bent down and teased out a wire, pretended to be very interested in examining it. I just mean, you two used to be like a pair of shoes, said Lala. We were. Then we weren't. That damn karase was still sitting in the tree. It flapped its wings at her. I thought it was kind of sweet the way you two stuck together when everyone was knives out for each other. But obviously now I get it. She's different. I mean, she marches to her own drum. Come on, give me that. They worked in silence for a while, Lala's words looping on repeat in her brain. Wasn't everyone different? Breathing with their own pair of lungs, living in their own bubble of experience? And, put that way, how could she ever hope to understand why someone would want to do this? She took the parts and began to sort the materials into 4 different cribs made of cherry wood. Wires, tubes, circuits, etc. She already recognized some of it from the list of items Alpha had noted as removed from the shop without proper record. And those pieces may have come from Agmod, that from the lab. Everything was sticky with the ship's ubiquitous lime green putty. and made her fingers smell like cheese. Asuka shut her eyes, saw a cat's body going to pieces, and felt her chest constrict. "You seem stressed, Asuka. Shall I tell you about the life cycle of the messenger pigeon?" As if to punctuate, the karasu was replaced by a pigeon on the sill, cuckooing. "You already did that one," said Asuka, and the pigeon disappeared. "I wasn't sure you were listening before." Lala squeezed her shoulder. "We will figure this out." When Asuka glanced again, the pigeon had become a robin. Its red breast caught the afternoon sun, and her mood lifted a fraction. Robins always cheered her up. "Hey, lady!" A message from Gabriella appeared. "Genki!" Asuka smiled. It used to bother her how good Gabriella's Japanese was, but at least it was something they shared. Nantoka. Why are you awake?" "Couldn't sleep. I swapped for the end of B cook shift. Come and keep me company later?" "Don't want to be alone. I will feed you well." "Sure." "Yay! I'll be there starting B 6:30. Lala tossed a stick of combustible material into the air and caught it, and it occurred to Asuka that Lala was spacewalk certified. She'd known about the mission. She evidently knew about bombs. "What happened between you and the captain?" Lala stopped playing catch and set down the package wrapped in self-sealing plastic. "It had nothing to do with this." "Tell me anyway." The late afternoon sun pooled on the wooden floor, soft and mellow. It reminded Asuka of the taste of scrambled eggs, hot and buttery from the cast iron pan. She felt an ache in her gut for the things they'd left behind. Then a cloud moved across the sky, darkening the room. "It's not uncommon to miscarry," said Lala. "Of course, I know that. Like it's not weird to have trouble conceiving after spending 10 years in chemically induced hibernation." Asuka tried to keep her face neutral. She sat down in an overstuffed armchair that was not as soft as it appeared. "After I lost the first one, Mission Control recommended putting me on special meds as a precaution for when I got pregnant the second time. Some drug approved in the last 10 years. They sent a formula for us to print, so I started taking it. Then I hear captains approved a software upgrade patch to the pharmaceutical printer. And guess what? The formulas changed. And then I lost the second one. You get what I'm saying? You think the captain did something?" "I don't know. I was upset." Grief thickened her voice. "I fought so hard to be here. I know we all did, but people like Nick Mahone and Yang Yue, did they ever have to chop off their toes to fit a shoe?" She twisted the wire into coils. "If I had stayed on Earth, there were lots of things I could have done." "Ran for president?" joked Asuka, because that was something they used to say about Lala. "Sure," she said. "Maybe. I knew I could be something. But then I looked up at the night sky, and I felt in my body that there was so much more out here than on a little ball of dirt and water and gas, where everything goes around and around, and history is just the illusion of forward motion. I just want to know the feeling, Susie, to be somewhere else, to own a whole world with nobody to make the rules but us." Lala began to wind a coil of wire. "See, you've been asking the wrong question." "What's the right question?" "Why did you come, Susie?" They stared at each other. Asuka could hear the thrum of the generator and the air cycling and the water circulating in the pipes. Her mouth was very dry. Then Lala giggled. "You're so tense." Asuka was saved from responding by a message from Yaz that the dining mod had been repressurized, and she should come inspect it before people tramped all over it. "You go ahead, I can finish this," said Lala. When Asuka hesitated, she made a shooing motion. "Come on! Do you or don't you trust me?" "I trust you," Asuka lied. Chapter 27. USA, 9 years, 3 months before launch. Rain drummed against the glass windows of the hallway of the gymnasium, casting dappled gray shadows on the wood-paneled wall opposite. A line of even-star candidates extended down the corridor, waiting for their semi-annual physical. Asuka shuffled in her spot behind Mickey and Trina, glancing back every so often at the entrance. Still no Ruth. Somehow, from the moment Asuka had crawled dripping from the simulation tank, they'd become inseparable. Trina referred to Ruth as Asuka's BFF with only thinly veiled jealousy. "Smart girl," said Trina. "Not like I want to wait in line either for this crap." Mickey shrugged. "I don't mind. I've got to study for this terrible maths exam either way." "You'll totally ace that. I don't know why you're even stressed about it. Meanwhile, I've got to get through this problem set." "What did you get for question number 3? They were taking a musicology elective together, and Trina was always asking Mickey for help. "Can you look at what I got and tell me if I'm in the ballpark?" Mickey caught the invisible file and skimmed it. "I'd say you're in the same town." She wagged a finger. "You know I can't tell you the answer." "Relax," said Trina. "I wasn't asking you to cheat." Ruth came in, soaking wet. She was dressed in a t-shirt with encrypted DAR encoded into it, so only authorized people could read the text, which said, "Future Matriarch," in pink and yellow letters. She leaned down to adjust the sopping wet cuff of her pants that had ridden up around her prosthetic. "Where have you been?" Trina asked. "Oh, nowhere," said Ruth, slipping into line with a concealed wink at Asuka. Asuka messaged her. "Did anyone recognize you?" "Don't think so. I kept my hood up and my face fully augmented." "A date?" Mickey asked. Ruth laughed. She had sneaked off campus to attend a local chapter meeting of Save Mother Earth. When Asuka confessed to Ruth that her mother had gotten weird since attending SME stuff, Ruth had become obsessed with the idea of checking out one of their meetings as a sort of covert operation. She tried to get Asuka to come. "Don't you want to know what they're saying about us?" No, Asuka didn't. She was surprised when Ruth went anyway, without her. At the far end, a group of 10 candidates emerged from the gymnasium. One of them was sobbing, and as they walked down the long hall, they were followed by the swish of speculative whispers. The physicals screened for general wellness, as well as any early warning signs of fertility issues. Modern medicine being what it was, most issues could be addressed, but there were several candidates who were eliminated each round for things that couldn't. The line inched up. They were a few people from the door. Waiting resumed with the new tension in the air. "They're out," said Trina, checking their social feed. "Fuck." "Awful," agreed Mickey. They checked their stats discreetly. Without them, they would all be one rank higher. Asuka tried and failed to suppress the jolt of excitement that shot through her. She turned to Ruth, who was wringing her hair out and leaving puddles on the floor. "So, what was it like?" "I thought you didn't want to know." Ruth gave her a wicked grin. Her love of torturing Asuka wasn't quite gone just because they were friends. "Come on, tell me. No one recognized you?" Ruth wriggled her fingers lightning quick, and a reply came through. Nope. I was just another kid worried about the planet. Ruth used to attend all sorts of political meetings back home in London. Evenstar frowned at political activism since it had the potential to scare away donors, especially nation sponsors. So Ruth had reluctantly given up many of her causes since enrolling. Asuka sighed. What's going on? Trina asked, leaning out of line to catch their attention. Nothing, said Ruth. Honestly, Asuka, they were totally normal. Who was? Ruth gave Trina a sharp look. Pardon me, but we're having a private conversation right now? Hurt flashed across Trina's face, and Asuka was about to tell them what it was about, but Ruth caught her arm in warning. Asuka didn't think Trina would blab about Asuka's mom's outlandish political activities, but it was best no one knew Ruth had gone to one of their meetings. Ruth finished the thought via DAR message. There was the expected bitching about Evenstar, but no one said anything about Linda Trembling being a secret agent from Alpha Centauri, or that we're brainwashed super agents being trained to take over world governments. I actually had fun. Fun? Yeah. They were coming up with strategies for how to shame the municipal government into paying its fair share of carbon tax. And you know what? They're totally right, by the way. Who knows, I might even go again. You can't, Asuka hissed. Ruth smiled, enjoying the panic on Asuka's face. You're disappointed they weren't total weirdos, aren't you? Poor kid. Not true, Asuka said, but as she watched the rain, she couldn't help feeling like someone had broken a plate on the floor, and the hidden shards were there to cut her feet. She'd seen a headline that SME had been harassing fishing boats passing through Tokyo Bay and recognized a blurry photo of her mom. What worried Asuka was the other weird things Mom talked about: brain chips and dark conspiracies, and the true mission of Evenstar. They fought about it constantly. You don't trust me? Asuka demanded. Of course, sweetie. But it was like they lived in different realities. The gymnasium doors opened, and a new batch of students exited, Lala Williams among them. This time, no one bothered to keep their comments to a whisper when she passed. Someone called out, "Tough break, Lala." Lala lifted her chin up and kept walking as if she hadn't heard, but halfway down the hall, she pumped a fist. Some people started to clap for her, but only a few. Ruth and Asuka did, though Asuka didn't know what they were clapping for. Lala walked on by without a hello. Lala's out? Trina asked. Pretty much, said Becky McMahon from in front of her. The U.S. committee says her social media comments violated their code of conduct. For having opinions, you mean? Said Ruth. It was disrespectful. Our country is paying for our seats. That means they get to decide who they want representing them. She gets the extra tutors and an allowance and a snack basket once a month, and she thinks she's been treated badly? U.S. candidates get snack baskets? Mickey asked Trina. Trina shrugged like it was no big deal. Corporate sponsors. Not for the first time, Asuka regretted being stuck as a Japanese rep when she could have gotten all that. What did she say exactly? A lot of things. Like the system is basically rigged for white people, claimed with absolutely zero proof that some of us get the better tutors, and criticized the fact that some countries have a disproportionate number of seats. I mean, come on. She's lucky she didn't get kicked out of the entire program. McMahon tossed her head, ponytail swishing the air. Evenstar is the definition of meritocracy. She nodded with her chin at Mickey and Asuka. Anyway, China has just as many seats as America. Asuka considered correcting her. Decided to let it go. she could still get a wildcard spot, right? Absolutely. If anyone could get one, it's Lala, said Mickey. They filed into a brightly lit gymnasium. There were 10 stations, including a treadmill, scales, and squeaky chairs. Each station was partitioned by curtains. Their voices echoed against the vaulted ceiling. I hate this, said Trina. Despite the size of the gymnasium, it was claustrophobic. This feeling of being measured and weighed and pricked. Step on the scale, please, the doctor said to Asuka. She obeyed. You've lost weight. Oh, said Asuka. Was that a good thing? I've been running a lot. 3 meals a day? Not a good thing then. Yeah? It's just that sometimes she was too stressed to swallow. The doctor lifted her arms and ran a thumb along her scars. Those are old, Asuka said. Something was jotted down, and she began to sweat. The doctor took a blood sample. It seemed to take an hour for the light on the machine to change. Next station. Remember to get 8 hours of sleep. As if she had time for that, and everything they wanted her to do. While she waited in line for the treadmill, Ruth and Trina rejoined her, and Ruth said, There's a petition started for Lala to reinstate her U.S. candidacy. What do you reckon? Should we sign it? Trina bit their lip. I'm not sure I can afford to. They twisted a piece of hair around their finger. I know, I'm so torn, Ruth said, which meant she wasn't torn at all. She had her hands on her hips, all geared up to argue. But aren't there more important things in life? I'm saying we have minds. Don't they want us to use them? I have things to say, don't I? Sometimes I want to scream. And Asuka thought of the thrill in Ruth's eyes earlier when she was talking about the SME meeting. She wondered what it was like to be Ruth. To be that smart and passionate about everything, and not care so much about what other people thought. Easy for you, said Trina. But it's double risk for me. I could piss off the US committee and even Star. But you've got a platform, said Ruth. What's the point if you won't use it when it really matters? Trina stuck out their jaw. The problem is that Lala's in the top 100, and I'd like to be. Lala's departure wouldn't solve that for you. Ruth appealed to Asuka for support, but it was Mickey, stepping off the treadmill, who spoke up first. I find it. She shrugged at Trina's expression. She's a nice person, and we're not in competition. Asuka pretended to be very interested in positioning herself on the machine, because she and Mickey were in competition, even if Mickey was ahead. Would Mickey sign a petition for her? She flinched as the nurses stuck cold wires to her chest. What about you? Ruth asked Asuka. Yeah, okay. Trina made a noise of disgust. You always side with Ruth. Well, fine. I'll sign it then. I can't be the only asshole here. But when Asuka glanced over, Trina seemed relieved. The machine churned on, and Asuka began to run. She could feel her heart thumping hard in her chest, the strain on her lungs, the long lingering effects of the forest fire. In and out, she had to concentrate. It was getting easier, wasn't it? Rio, Lewis, Rio, Lewis. The old rhythm came back to her, and everything else fell away. Still, when she stepped off the machine, skin flecked with sweat and shoulders heaving, she couldn't help bracing herself for a blow. Next, said the nurse, totally bored. After, as they crossed the campus back to their dorms, Ruth halted in the middle of the path. The rain had ended, and it smelled like grass and mud, like the whole world was fresh. A robin was singing, but Asuka wasn't sure if it was real. "Let's make a pledge. Right now," said Ruth. "We have each other's back until the end." "I'm in," said Mickey, taking Ruth's hand. "To friendship," said Trina. And Asuka thought, I would go anywhere with these kids. Do anything for them. I would. Later, when everything fell apart, Asuka would think she had never been so happy as she was back then. Chapter 28. The Phoenix, 3,981 cycles after launch, 1 cycle after the explosion, B-shift. The dining mod was well on its way to normal when Asuka arrived, except for the charring all over the floor. At least, the cleaning bots had scrubbed up all the blood, the smaller bits of debris already cleared away. Hina, one of Yaz's bots in Drone's operation squad, was overseeing the repairs. When they were growing up, Hina had had a mole on her upper lip, but it was surgically removed before launch. No scar even. Did she mind, Asuka wondered, leaving that piece of herself behind? "What do you want?" "Captain sent me to review and report on damage." Best be quick so she could get back to Lala. But where to even start? "Hull repair is nearly done," said Hina. "The programming team factory reset all the bots, and they finally quit misbehaving." The floor was half melted. One of the long dining tables leaned drunkenly on its side, a leg gone, and another was twisted and off-kilter. Everything smelled faintly of burnt plastic. A message from Lala popped up. "Hey, just thought of it. Did you check the pro mod for that drill?" "Yes." "Damn." Asuka touched one of the burnt spots. Internal damage was extensive. Tables and benches needed to be replaced or repaired, wires and pipes re-insulated. But you couldn't see stars through the hole anymore. And it was habitable again, so that was something. The hole where the bomb had blown out was surprisingly neat, almost a rectangle. Some of the edges were vaguely scalloped, the same diameter repeating. "Is it normal for a bomb to cause this kind of damage?" she asked Hina, but the other woman didn't know. She asked Alpha, but Alpha didn't know either. There were only a handful of interior cameras on the ship. "Your privacy is important," explained Alpha, sounding offended. Right, because a tiny ship has so much privacy. Asuka knelt to eyeball grooves in the floor. At least with Dar, they wouldn't have to stare at it for the next 9 years. "Alpha, can you create a simulation if I tell you what to do?" "I'll do my best." Asuka examined the edges of the reconstructed patch of the wall again, then backed up. The serving counter was built with hollows on the wall side, stacked with dishes. Both the captain and Winnie had been on that side of the counter and had snagged in that space. It's why they hadn't been sucked out with the atmosphere. She went and touched the door. The captain was here, farther from the blast. She turned and paced off along the counter, where the warped countertop leaned against the wall. Winnie was here. She had to load the simulation in the public DAR, since her own wasn't working. The ghosts of their crewmates re-corporated. "What are you doing?" said Hina. Taking a few steps, she tried to guess where Winnie was before the explosion. She should have been in the kitchen mod, since she was volunteering for cooking duty, but perhaps she was bringing food out to serve, or came into the dining mod to talk to the captain. She adjusted the sim. "Creepy," said Hina. Captain McMahon walked in and went to Winnie. "Do either of you know why the captain went down to the dining mod?" Asuka asked Yue and AM. "I was on her sim team during final training," said Hina, eyes stuck on the projection of McMahon. She shuddered. Final Scenario 4. Final Scenario 4 was the simulation of the ship fire. People still had nightmares. Incredible how fast fire could jump from module to module like that. Even now, the memory of it made Asuka's palms sweat. She vented the module as soon as the fire started. No hesitation. Bam. 3 of us dead. Hina swallowed. She said, "Well, saving the ship is the most important thing." And the expression on her face when she did it. Completely calm. When she was picked for captain, I thought, well, it makes sense. She puts the mission first. And she was the high priestess of kissing Linda Trembling's ass. But I'd take Yue any day. Not surprising. All the bots and drones crew were fiercely loyal to their former vice captain. Maybe the only people who were, besides the other Chinese crewmates. They studied Captain McMahon and Winnie. It wasn't quite right, not given how she'd found their bodies. She adjusted their positions. Thing was, Asuka wasn't sure that Captain McMahon had made the wrong call during Final Scenario 4. That was the point of the simulation. The more people you saved, the more damage to the ship. It was an impossible trade-off. Asuka had been on Yue's team, and they had opted to save people first. After that, they were left with extensive damage to overall habitability and significant risks to the mission. A reply came back from AM. She said she needed to talk to Winnie about something. Talk about what? Asuka rubbed an eyebrow with one knuckle. IDK. She told me none of my biz. Okay. So, Captain came down, they talked, and then Captain went to leave, and maybe Winnie moved to follow her. What time did the air sensors go off? She asked Alpha. B544. A cycle ago. Shipboard clocks were 8-hour clocks that reset each shift, so 5 hours and 44 minutes into B shift. The explosion happened at B547. The timing couldn't be a coincidence. Asuka raked her fingers through her hair. So there was a leak at B544, and they ignored the sensor at first because they figured the sensor goes off all the time. And maybe because whatever they were talking about was too important to interrupt. That is not correct. What? Several beats passed. Then Alpha said, the leak started at B512. Tina dropped her screwdriver with the clatter. The fuck? Asuka's pulse quickened. Why didn't the sensor go off then? Was there something wrong with it? I am sorry. I don't know. A knee-high boxy cleaning bot emerged from the inner wall and trundled over. Hina shooed it away and picked up the tool again. Wow. I'm kind of amazed that works after everything that's happened in here. What caused the leak? I'm sorry, Asuka. I do not keep logs of crew movement. Hina went to the door and opened a panel on the wall next to it. Let's see. She bent over, suddenly, clutching her stomach. Sorry, She rushed to the door, but didn't make it before she threw up on the floor. First trimester sucks. It only gets better, said Asuka, parroting what people said. Hina resumed fiddling with the air sensor panel. Let's see what we've got. The cover plate came free, and she proceeded to disassemble the whole thing. Generally, If there is something wrong with the atmosphere, the crew has time to evacuate to the adjacent module. The idea being, the bot crew can then come in and find the leak. No harm done. Asuka turned back to the simulation. She touched the patched wall and thought of the explosion. There had been a leak, small enough that no one noticed at first. Maybe. The sensors went off late. Why? You coming? It was Gabriella. Shoot! Asuka had completely forgotten their plans to eat together. I'm so sorry, I got pulled into something. You have to eat, Gabriella said. I know. I'll come as soon as I can. Maybe she could stop by the nursery real quick and check on Lala on the way there. I don't see anything wrong with the sensors, Hina was saying. They were fixed recently, and everything here seems to be working fine. If there was a leak, the alarm should have gone off. She reached around for her screwdriver to reassemble the sensor. Shit! Alpha's bot ate my screwdriver. It's not my bot, Alpha said. It's the Phoenix's bot. I don't care. Stop it! Asuka turned and ran after the industrious machine, which was trundling back to its wall cupboard after sucking up both the vomit and the screwdriver. She imagined it swiveled with a hint of self-satisfaction. She dove for it and caught it as it was backing inside. Alpha must have shut the bot off because its wheels stopped spinning. Asuka tipped the bot over and undid the trap full of crap. Oh, she said, pulling out the screwdriver covered in vomit. A flash of red, deeper down, caught her eye. Well, huh. She reached all the way into the container, heedless of the vomit, and triumphantly pulled out Lala's missing drill. Chapter 29. Robins were particularly astute at spotting breed parasites in their nests. Detecting a white and brown speckled egg among their blue brood, they would peck at the eggs until the shell was pierced, then fly away with the interloping egg firmly in their mouth, leaving just a trace of yellow yolk behind. Other birds were less successful, to the peril of their offspring. Chapter 30. The Phoenix, 3,981 cycles after launch, 1 cycle after the explosion, B shift. The drill reeked of vomit and putrescent food scraps. A slimy black potato skin clung to one handle, along with a wet clump of hair and bits of oof. That better not be the bit of intestine she'd seen on the wall earlier. Asuka held it at arm's length, suppressing a gag. At least the handle and base were relatively clean, thanks to a spare sock that had also been sucked up by the bot. That's got to give even a bot indigestion, said Hina. Whoever used it last is in big trouble. Yeah, said Asuka, absently. She frowned at the wall, where Hina's bots were filling in the insulation. What is it, Susie? Asuka went to a cabinet near the back wall, where the cooking station was. She grabbed a metal tray from one of the cabinets and laid the drill on it. I'll be back later, she said, half an idea percolating in her brain. The wheel was empty, except for 2 crew out for a run. They passed her a couple of times, each pass eyeing Asuka's strange tray as she stepped out of their way. Are you feeling better? Alpha asked. Why would I be? Last I checked, everything is terrible. Asuka resumed walking counterspin. Do you know what kind of powder might work to reveal visible fingerprints so we can image them? Anything we might have in the lab? Let me think about that, said Alpha. A beat passed. Try titanium dioxide and calcium carbonate. That was fast. I reside in a 10th generation Zenith processor, said Alpha. Should expect nothing less. Shall I go ahead and prepare some for you? The lab mod was empty. The vice captain had given the squad time off for mental health. Most of the work on ship was busy work when you got down to it anyway. The Phoenix had run just fine for 10 years while they were asleep. And though you could argue 80 crew awake and knocking about, but a lot more wear and tear on the Phoenix, their bots kept everything ship-shape. She set the tray down and went to the chemical printer along one side of the room. Inside the cabinets were enough liquids and powders to make a chemist cry. They were hard to replenish, but the recycle machine could salvage about 95% of everything. If energy wasn't a constraint, which of course it was, or would be eventually if they didn't reach another sun. She could hear the machine churning already, as Alpha promised. She leaned her ear against it and listened to it hum. What was it in her door? Ah, the kitchen from her family's old house before the fire, but with more sinks and counters, and no smell of coffee or fresh bread. All done, Alpha said. Asuka grabbed the box inside, along with a lid from a stack next to the machine. Now what, Asuka? A stop at medical to borrow a scanner. How Yu was there, rifling through test tubes and humming mindlessly. They startled when Asuka entered. Oh, hi Susie. They shut the drawer. I'm just checking to make sure everything is in the right place. Asuka frowned. Why would things be out of order? Oh, no, they wouldn't. I like things to be neat and organized. There were dark circles under their eyes. Isn't it your sleep cycle? I'm subbing for Fernanda. She's on bed rest. Medical was one of the few positions Asuka wasn't trained to sub for, so the medics had to cover for each other. I'm sorry about the attack, said How are you? What? Asuka looked at them uncertainly. Okinawa. We hit it with some long-range missiles, apparently. Airstrike. Asuka's heart sank. How Yu was talking about the conflict back home, so it had already gotten that far. I'm so afraid of what will happen, How Yu said. You have to believe me. I don't support this. Some people are being weird about it, and I get it, but it hurts. I honestly don't even understand why we're fighting, confessed Asuka. It always comes down to nationalism, fascism, and imperialism, doesn't it? Which didn't give Asuka any clearer sense. It all was too far away. But the headlines in the public feed had a way of worming their way into the back recesses of her mind. She felt it sitting there like background radiation, invisible, but ever-present. How Yu covered their eyes a moment. Anyway, what do you need? Their face was wan, and their voice sounded gray. Can I borrow your scanner for something? Sure. How Yu waved toward the equipment. Asuka hesitated, then asked them about what Lala had said about McMahon and the pharmaceutical printer. She'd expected How Yu to dismiss all of it as ridiculous. Had asked, in fact, because she wanted to be reassured. How Yu stared off into the distance, maybe watching her dragon frolic. I don't know. It's true that McMahon wanted to be very involved, but I thought we were done with that. She waited for How Yu to elaborate, but How Yu was lost in a Lyridon. As she was leaving, Bei said, Sometimes I wish Dar were real. On her way back to the nursery, Yingyue messaged her. Mission Control wants to know if we have a list of crew who might be sympathetic to SME. Ruth was. She could have said that, but no way. Ruth couldn't be a sleeper agent. Anyway, Ruth had attended those meetings as a joke before they became more extreme. A lot of people care about the environment, she told Yue. She stepped into the nursery and stopped short because Ruth was there with Lala when this whole investigation was supposed to be a secret. And there was a robin flying around the inside of Lala's family brownstone like it was trapped. Asuka determinedly ignored it. Ruth was dancing to inaudible music. When Ruth was a child, she'd wanted to be a professional dancer. Then a weird bacterial infection required the amputation of her leg. And during the year of her recovery, she became obsessed with ecology. She could still dance, though. Asuka didn't know why she assumed a body left things like that tethered to solid ground. Oh, Ruth clutched her chest. You scared me. I left one intact, but deactivated, said Lala, pointing at the device, just in case you want to examine it later. Asuka carried the tray with the scanner, powder, and drill over to the table along the far wall. Lala stared at the red handle. Where'd you find that? Dining mod. What the hell? Said Lala, tugging on an earlobe. How did it end up there? What's all the rest of it? Ruth asked. An idea, Asuka said. Do we have a plan yet for getting back on course? Mission Control is developing options, all of them bad, but we're running out of time, so we're going to have to pick one and try. They watched her sprinkle powder onto the floor. A claiming bot darted out, and Asuka caught it and flipped it over. It whirred in protest, then shut off. She yanked one of the brushes off and checked its coarseness. Finer would be better, but maybe it would work. Only one way to find out. By the way, said Ruth. She glanced at Lala, who nodded encouragingly, then continued, If you want, I could take a look at your implant. Ruth had specialized in programming at school, but they'd picked her for officer track instead. Thanks, Gabriella already said she would. Telling Ruth, see, I don't need you anymore. I can make new friends. Something flashed across Ruth's face. Her words may have been a paper cut, but they'd stung. Good. Asuka dipped the brush into the box of powder and began to dust the casing of one of the bombs. Lala moved to the tray, reaching for the drill. Don't touch that, please. She dropped her hands. Whatever you think you're up to, Susie. I hope you know what you're doing. And dusting for prints, said Asuka, glancing at Lala's face again. Had her eyebrow twitched? Will that work? Ruth asked. No idea. You haven't taken your gloves off all this time, right? The little brush went back and forth, light as a feather. No. Asuka squatted, leveled her eye with the surface, and detached the drill bit. She dusted the long metal piece, one side, then the other. Nothing. Chances were this was a dead end. People wore their smart gloves most of the time, but nobody was perfect, and mistakes were possible. The tiny brush went over all the surfaces. She could feel them watching her work. Thought how ridiculous she'd feel when she found nothing. You know, said Lala abruptly, the president called me once. Election year. Wanted me to know she'd asked the committee to reinstate me as an American rep. Asuka stopped. She did? Tamped down that old envy. She'd had a fantasy back at Evenstar, when she was feeling particularly misplaced, that the US committee might call her, lobby her to come over to their team, and then Japan would say, no, please stay. After that, the daydream got fuzzy. She didn't know what she'd have done, but to be asked. I said no thanks. What? Why? I'm not here for them or anybody else. I'm here for me. Same. Ruth grabbed some tubing from the explosive and brought it over. Try this. The material is slippery, so they might have taken their gloves off to attach it. Nothing. Ruth grabbed another brush footy from the bot and started on a different set of components. Lala watched them uneasily, lacing and unlacing her fingers. If these bombs were made with stuff on the ship, they could have anyone's fingerprints on them. It doesn't prove anything. Hush, hon. We're investigating. Serious business. Asuka moved to the drill handle. Best to get it over with. I think someone used this to drill holes in the hull of the ship. The same person who made these bombs. Lala's face was stone. A lot of people borrow drills, said Lala. I told you, I don't know who. Bloody hell, said Ruth. Because there, on the signal receiver case, were 3 fingerprints. Chapter 31. USA. 8 years, 11 months before launch. All first year, Asuka's sim team held the #1 spot. Asuka was happy because she had found something to excel in, even if their survival simulations felt more like a sport than an academic specialty. Only 10% of the students had cracked the first simulation. Fewer passed the next one, or the one after. Asuka never failed. That thing you did last time with the shoelaces. How did you even think of that? Ruth asked her. When everything's lost, it's like you go somewhere else inside yourself. What's the point of these terrible exercises? Trina moaned. After returning from a terrifying death, quote-unquote. Linda's trying to break us. Well, Coach Lee broke me 3 sims ago, so she can stop. Despite their grumbling, they all liked Coach Lee. She taught them techniques for overcoming their panic in a crisis. She was one of the few adults who advised them about how to take care of their mental health. At the beginning of the second year, Coach Lee announced that the composition of the teams would change monthly, at random. Great, said Ruth glumly, when she learned they'd be split up. I guess failure is the next frontier. Not like it happens to me a lot, anyway. You were so full of it, Trina laughed, chucking an empty water bottle at her. Asuka jogged down to the boxy concrete building for her first sim of the year, and was surprised to find a bus waiting for them. Coach Lee stood next to the door, making sure everyone put on their visi before boarding. Gabriella Ota waved at her from the middle. She had saved her a seat. They were project partners in Developmental Psychology 101, and Asuka liked Gabriella. Any idea where we're going? Asuka asked her. Of course not. Becky McMahon was sitting in the seat in front of them. That's the whole point. She'd only been making conversation. This was the first time they'd been taken off campus for a sim. Asuka leaned back, biting a nail. Her hands were already prickling with sweat. Her nerves peaked right before a sim started, and each time she thought her mind would blink with terror. But somehow, once the scenario started, she figured out a way through it. How'd the history test go? Gabriella asked, changing the subject. Ugh, said Asuka. Terrible. It wasn't that bad, said McMahon, turning around again. If you attended all the lectures. Asuka's guts churned in a convection of self-hatred and self-pity, because it was true. She'd skipped 2 classes, but the score in the ancient history class was worth less than the physics exam when it came to class standing. She was 13 and trying to devour the world. Maybe for McMahon it was easy. I know history. Asuka stuck out her chin. There were wars, there were pandemics, There were lots and lots of extreme weather events. The sea level rose, a lot of people died in various unfair ways. And the 10 billion people left on this planet are going to die over the next century from various human-made problems. Okay, cool it down, said McMahon. She was laughing, and so were the others around her. Asuka's face burned. She hadn't meant to get so worked up. It was because of her mother's post on social media. She'd seen it that morning, talking about the environmental ramifications of constructing an interstellar ship. We are sending millions of kilograms of our precious resources out of the solar system. These are not things that can be replenished. We're also using nuclear material from thousands of warheads, Asuka wanted to tell her. Shouldn't that count for something? But there was no arguing with her mother. The bus stopped, and Coach Lee instructed them to disembark. Are you okay? Gabriella asked, catching her sleeve. Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing here. What do you mean? Gabriella squinted at her, like she was genuinely trying to understand. Asuka gestured with a wide sweep of her arm that captured all of herself. Look at me. Everyone feels that way, you know? I feel that way. Asuka opened her mouth to ask her what she knew. Was about to say, but at least you aren't like some off-brand version of the thing people really wanted. But of all people here, Gabriella would understand. For a moment, she wished irrationally that Gabriella too was a candidate for Japan. Even if that put them more directly in competition, at least she'd have someone to commiserate with after national team meetings. McMahon exchanged a few words with Coach Lee, who was sitting up front as she filed off the bus. Coach Lee smiled. All the Even Star faculty, even Coach Lee, liked McMahon. You're good enough, said Gabriella. So am I. When we're through here, people will be happy to claim us. They found themselves in a small village by the sea. Never mind they were in the middle of America. The sun was shining, and the bus had disappeared into thin air. Asuka tightened the strap of her Visi. She'd finally switched out Lewis's for the newest model. The old one couldn't process the same volume of data. As she and Gabriella went to join the others, Gabriella shook out her hair in a graceful cascade and tied it up again. Asuka resisted the urge to touch her own hair, stringy and all split ends. Gabriella lowered her voice to ask if she meant what she had said earlier to McMahon. I guess so, said Asuka. Why else are we here? Because we're trying to leave this place. It was swagger, but Gabriella was startled. Really? A breeze came through and brushed the bangs out of her face. Asuka surveyed where they'd been deposited. The road was narrow, lined with shops selling ice cream and fishing tackle. Not too far beyond was a wooden promenade leading to a beach. Why are you here then? Gabriella frowned. It's not giving up on the world. It's making more of it. Isn't that the point? If I thought the problems here were unfixable, I couldn't support the mission. But if that were true, we wouldn't deserve another chance. And we do. Gabriella put a hand on Asuka's shoulder at the same moment the ground began to shake. They clutched each other in an awkward embrace, trying to keep their footing. What the? McMahon said. Asuka took in the ocean, and then she and Gabriella had the same thought at the same time. Tsunami! What? McMahon asked. There. Asuka pointed toward a hill in the distance, maybe half a mile away. We have to get to higher ground. How do you know? It's a guess, said Asuka. McMahon crossed her arms. Need a little more than that, Susie. There was just an earthquake. We're by the ocean. Asuka jabbed her finger at the water. When I lived in Japan, we were taught if there's an earthquake, you need to get away from the ocean right away. Okay, but the Sims are not about your personal context, said McMahon. For all you know, this one is about a monster that's about to come stomping down from the hills, in which case, we'd be running the wrong way. Forget it. Come on, she heard Gabriella shout to the others. We have to go. But Asuka was already running. A few minutes later, she heard a roar and looked back. Only half the group had followed her. A great wave washed through the town. They removed their vizies to find themselves in the middle of the hill behind the campus. The ocean was just their campus lake. The earthquake caused by a mechanical platform. The bus must have driven them in circles around campus to disorient them. Coach Lee sat them down at the picnic tables by the lake for a debrief. She took off her oversized white sunglasses, and the disappointment in her eyes was plain. If you're selected for the mission, you're not going to have anyone but each other. Sure, mission control will give you direction, but at the end of the day, it'll just be you. She indicated Asuka. Susie survived, that's good, but not the point of these. Do you know what the point of these are, Susie? Asuka swallowed past a lump in her throat. She had won, hadn't she? Why was this even a lecture? Becky raised her hand. Coach Lee lifted an eyebrow. Yes? It's about maximizing success of the mission through teamwork, said Becky, flashing the instructor a smile. She was too pleased for someone who had just been crushed by a 100-foot wave. You convinced 6 people not to run, said Asuka, temper rising. She had to stop talking or she was going to mortify herself by starting to bawl. And you left us behind, retorted Becky. She was about to point out that Becky did the same when it suited her, but Coach Lee interrupted. Kids! Her eyebrows knit together in a scowl. Here's what you need to learn. This whole endeavor, this mission, is not about you or your feelings or whether you like each other or not. Understand? Or you will let all of us down. Chapter 32. The Phoenix. 3,981 cycles after launch. 1 cycle after the explosion. B shift. They stared down at the fingerprints on the signal receiver case. So, asked Lala, even if you knew whose those were, what does that prove? Ruth laid a hand on her arm. Well, what are the chances? Those have to be the killers, right? Calm down, hun. Everyone knows you're spacey when you're working on your bots. It's not your fault a murderer borrowed your drill. How do we figure out whose those are, Asuka? Asuka picked up the receiver and lifted it to the scanner she'd borrowed from Hao Yu. Can you see these? She asked Alpha. Confirmed. Okay, and then what? Lala said. Asuka yanked off her gloves and held her fingertips to the scanner. Alpha couldn't see the inside of the Phoenix beyond the outlines of their clothes and smart objects in DAR. But she could see the images generated by the scanner. Alpha, can you check for a match? Confirming, Alpha said. Your fingerprints are not a match. Or maybe the scanner doesn't work, Lala said. I have confirmed it works. The door opened, and they both jumped and spun around. It was Gabriella holding a tray of food. Oh, she said, surprised to see the 3 of them together. Sorry, am I interrupting? I brought you dinner, CZ, because You said you were working, and it's important that you eat, and... She took in the materials laid out on the changing tables and shrank back a step. Ruth tensed next to Asuka. She'd been dusting parts with powder, and now she froze, as if she'd been caught red-handed. It did look bad. Asuka said quickly. Thank you, Gabriella. We're helping the captain with something. Gabriella glanced down at her tray. I'm not oblivious. There was a rumor going around already that you were investigating about what happened. You know you can't keep anything a secret in an 80-person crew. 77, said Ruth, and Gabriella's face crumpled. Lala laughed. Oh yeah, the whole shop definitely knows. Whatever, I get Yue was trying to protect the sanctity of the investigation, said Ruth. But transparency is important too. If Yue wants us all in this together, we've got to actually be all in this together. Did AM tell people? Asuka asked. No, they're just as upset as Yue got out. AM gave us quite a lecture. Lala crossed her arms. Is AM really gunning for her chair? So what if they are? Said Ruth. Becky and Yue only got captain because of where they're from. Doesn't mean they're the best choice. I like Yue. Anyway, Gabriella coughed, squaring her shoulders. The truth is, I came because I wanted to help. She offered Asuka the tray. Sorry, I guess you have plenty of help already. She looked from Ruth to Asuka. Lala is criticizing more than helping, said Ruth. Yeah, and, said Lala. This is perfect. You can be our first guinea pig, Gabriella. Bruce, Lala frowned. Step right up here and take off your gloves. Ruth grabbed Gabriella by the shoulders and pulled her to the spot where Asuka had been standing. Asuka took the tray. Suddenly she felt anxious. She didn't want it to be Gabriella. To distract herself, she tucked into the food Gabriella had brought her. This is great, she said. It was a flatbread pizza, decorated with a pesto of some kind of spiced tomatoes and basil, and a base that tasted like cracker. Surprisingly good, if unexpected. I know. What's pizza without cheese, right? Said Gabriella. It'll be decades before we can taste anything like that again. Isn't that depressing? Should have stayed on Earth, Lala said. Could have had all the pizza you wanted. There's more to life than pizza. Ruth held the scanner two-handed and gestured at Gabriella. Now go like this, okay? And smile. Gabriella glanced at Asuka for reassurance. What are you doing to me? Is this going to hurt? Not if you're innocent. They're checking if you're a terrorist, Lala said, because they're ridiculous. I thought, Gabriella squeaked, dropping her hands. The neon green bar of light from the scanner followed the movement of her fingers another few seconds before blipping out. She is not a match, Alpha told them. Congratulations, this exercise is pointless, said Lala. Why do you have to be so negative? Ruth said, bumping her with her hip. You thought I did it? Gabriella asked Asuka. No, of course not, Asuka said, but she felt a weight lift. She liked her bunkmate, and she was glad it wasn't her. Thanks for bringing me dinner. So, what are you going to do now? Scan everyone's fingers? Ruth yanked off her gloves and held her fingers up to the eye of the scanner. My turn. You are not a match. Excellent. Asuka took a large bite of pizza just as Yue and AM came in. The first vice captain was anxious to help, explained Yue with some exasperation, despite how much they had on their plates. Only doing my duty, said AM, matching her tone. Great campaign slogan, said Lala. You're the politics expert. Out on the street, the lamps switched on. Asuka filled them in on the exercise. So, you want to fingerprint everyone? Yume asked. She seemed to share Lala's discomfort with the idea. Makes sense, AM said. Everyone's a suspect at this point, right? Yume tugged the hem of her shirt down over her belly, mouth tight. I don't want everyone pointing fingers at each other. Too late, said Ruth. Whoever did this is going to know we're onto them before we get to them. AM laughed. And do what? Jump out an airlock? I don't know. You want to put it to an officer vote? Fine, sighed Yume. While they waited, AM opened one of the cabinets marked toys and began investigating the stuffed animals inside. They grabbed a plush purple dinosaur and looked up. The eyes have it. It's been like this every decision. I don't know why Yume does these votes when she could just decide. She always loses, Ruth said to Asuka and Lala. Painful. Did you vote yes? Lala asked, jaw set. Come on, babe. You have any better ideas? AM picked up the scanner and held their fingers to it. You are not a match. Bummer, Lala said. Captain? Said AM, offering the scanner. Would you stop it with the dinosaur? Said Lala. It's creepy. AM stopped wiggling the dinosaur and frowned at it. Reluctantly, Yume removed her gloves. Negative. When it was Lala's turn, she refused, straight up. She was pissed. This is all seriously fucked up. If you didn't do it, you have nothing to worry about, said AM impatiently. You don't even know how those fingerprints got there. Could have been anyone in the lab or the shop or the Agmots. And no offense, but I don't trust any of you. She backed up against the wall with her hands tucked under her arms. Well, I don't trust anyone, said AM, so none taken. We're all doing it, said Asuka, thinking that might help. So fucking what? Said Lala. AM, could you please put that dinosaur away? I can feel it looking at me. AM stuffed the plush toy in one of the crits. Sorry. Give her a moment, Ruth whispered something to Lala. Yume spread her hands. Lala, please. But Lala continued to refuse. It took major cajoling from Ruth and a direct order from the captain to get her to go along, and she was steaming by the time they got her gloves off in front of the scanner. I'm going on record that I don't like this, she said. A beat passed, and in it, Asuka thought she could feel the universe inhale. You are a match, said Alpha. The bottom dropped out of Asuka's stomach. What? Fantastic. Congratulations, Suzy Hoshina Silva, said Lala, crossing her arms. Now what are you going to do? Chapter 33, USA, 8 years, 1 month before launch. The second summer rolled around, and Asuka and her friends were still in the running. They entered their third year all in the top half. The class was down to 750 students, and everyone felt the tightening of the competition. It was starting to bring the worst out in people. A reluctance to share notes or do problem sets together. A hungry comparison of scores after every exam. If someone mentioned at lunch that they ran 5 miles every day, the next day, the track might be packed with delinquents ready to get back into shape. But Asuka was grateful at least to have her friends. Perhaps things had been fraying in their group for a while, and Asuka failed to notice until one afternoon. Asuka and the others lolled about on the grass under the cottonwood tree, augmented so it was in the middle of a picturesque English estate. They were trying their best to focus on their studies, except Trina, who was messing with the dar on Asuka's face. They were giving Asuka a makeover. Wait until I'm done with you, Trina kept saying. Asuka tried not to feel self-conscious about Trina's attention as she worked on a virtual model in DAR of a nanobot for the upcoming class. It was tricky, and she kept having to look up references for the best way to approach it. Asuka-chan, are you doing next week's homework? Mickey put down an invisible violin and watched Asuka manipulate a machine the rest of them couldn't see. We all deal with our insecurities in different ways, Ruth drawled. It's not an insecurity, it's survival, said Asuka. Ruth had an uncanny knack for dissecting a person. You're doing fine, said Mickey. She stroked the end of her ponytail, and not for the first time, Asuka felt jealous of how perfect her hair was. Straight, lustrous, not like Asuka's dark brown, untidy hair with its stray pieces always sticking straight up. Asuka caught Ruth and Mickey looking at each other a second too long, and she wondered whether there was something between the two of them. If so, she was happy for them, really. But it gave her the tingle of nervousness, the way she felt before she strapped on her visi, and her whole reality shifted into something new. What would happen if they got together? Would she be left behind? Stop squirming, Trina scolded. Asuka held still. You better watch out, Ruth teased Mickey. Asuka is gaining on you in the rankings. Mickey shrugged it off. But was that maybe a flash of fear? Or had Asuka imagined it? We're all the way behind Akiko anyway. They were a couple of years in, and the Japanese media was acting like it was a given that Akiko would be the national representative. I give Akiko a year to crack. She doesn't have either of your stamina, said Ruth, winking at Mickey. Mickey blushed and seemed to have a sudden, urgent need to check her class notes. Anyway, we could both get wildcard spots, Asuka said, because she wished Ruth would quit the subject. Only Ruth knew that she had gotten into the habit of checking Mickey's stats daily. She would die if Mickey found out. Asuka turned back to the machine and door, spun it around again in a full 360 degrees. She'd assembled it in two pieces, like the instructions suggested, and now the question was how to put the two halves together. No matter how she wriggled the pieces, they didn't fit. Done, said Trina, squinting at Asuka. Ready? Ruth rolled her eyes. Trina shared the door, conjuring a mirror so Asuka could see herself. Wow, said Asuka. Trina had done an expert job. The changes were subtle, but she looked different. Smoother skin, bigger eyes, angular features, and a chic haircut. For me, I like to tweak the features just enough to get that awesome androgynous look, they were explaining. Sticky, said Mickey. Ruth's lip curled. You made her look white. Asuka flushed. Maybe because I am white. Half, anyway. I know. It's just that you don't look like you. I think she looks fabulous, said Trina. Asuka dismissed the augment, feeling embarrassed and irritable. Hey, said Trina. Don't let anyone ever make you feel bad. Whatever. We need to study for Orgo, said Ruth. The three of them were in organic chemistry together. It sounded like torture, and Asuka was already dreading taking it during the fall, assuming she wasn't eliminated before then. After half an hour, Trina flopped over and declared themselves combusted in the brain. They threw an arm over their face and lay dozing under an umbrella, while Mickey and Ruth continued studying. Should we wake them up? The message from Mickey appeared in a small group chat, minus Trina. They're going to fail this exam if they don't study more. They're really behind. Ruth. They're behind because they skipped class last week. Mickey. It was fashion week, They had a big show. Asuka bit her lip. It gave her anxiety pains watching Trina lie there. Wake them up. Wake them up, Ruth agreed. A silent debate then, about who should do it. Mickey, obviously, because she had that soft, kind way about her. Mickey squatted down and touched Trina's arm. "Trina, dear," she said. And the other two suppressed giggles as Trina rolled over. Mickey prodded them again, and Trina blew the bangs out of their face. "I need a short nap," Trina groaned. Mickey looked helplessly at the others. Ruth got up and nudged Trina's side with her shoe. "Hey, #wake the fuck up." Trina sat upright, angry. "What is your problem?" "I'm trying to help you," said Ruth, crossing her arms. "We've got hours and hours," said Trina. "I'll pull an all-nighter." "Well, I'm getting a good night's sleep, so if you need my help, you've got to study now," Mickey said in a playful tone. She clapped for cheery emphasis, which annoyed Trina even more. Trina crossed their arms. "Who said I need your help? Last I checked, I was above you in the class rankings." They were, but by one. They and Mickey had been neck and neck since last semester. It was a running joke in their group that no longer seemed funny. "Are you fucking kidding me?" Ruth pulled her vizzy off. "Mickey saves your ass every time an exam rolls around." "Log out, Bruce," said Trina. "No one asked you. I know you like to give your unsolicited opinions, but have you ever considered not sticking your nose in other people's business and telling them what to do so much?" Ruth gaped at her a moment. "You are so beyond." "Come on, Trina," Mickey said, trying to make peace. The warm afternoon sun had turned cold in an instant. The vein in Ruth's forehead bulged. Trina said, "I'm feeling very judged right now." Then they folded up their umbrella, grabbed their vizzy, and walked off. They were all very surprised when Trina passed the exam the next day. They hadn't seen them since lunchtime, but the scores were public. "Good for them," Mickey murmured. But Ruth shot her a dark look that made Asuka's stomach turn over. "There was no way," Ruth messaged Asuka. "They did stay up all night, with the light on." Asuka had barely slept because of it. By dinner time, a sour funk hung over everything. It was just Asuka and Mickey, and every topic seemed to veer to grades and stats and rankings, which had gotten difficult for them to discuss. Trina must have known the others were in a bad mood, because they didn't show up. Ruth was running late. Asuka glanced at their empty places and pushed her food around with the fork. She thought idly of tempura and ramen and all the things the dining hall did not know how to cook. She messaged her mother, but she was at another of her group therapy sessions with her SME friends. One of the big lectures must have emptied out, and a long line to get food was forming. Asuka wondered if she should save her friends some of her meal to spare them the wait. "Here's a feature on Trina," Asuka said, sharing the link with Mickey. "I'm Trina. I'm 15, and one day, I'm going to bring fashion to Planet X." Trina stood next to them life-sized, tall and handsome, twirling that umbrella they designed that was augmented to rain gold glitter. They smiled with a very Trina attitude. And stats appeared next to them, including their net worth, their followers, a short description of how they were already changing the world through their art and fashion, and a note from them about how much they loved their friends. "They are my besties. I couldn't do this without them." "That's nice," said Mickey, without lifting her gaze from her salad. A shadow fell across their table. Hao Yu, one of the Chinese candidates, stood there hesitantly with their tray. "Hey," they said. "I'm sorry about Trina." Mickey and Asuka exchanged baffled glances. "Oh," said Haoyu, face coloring. "Sorry, I thought you knew. Trina dropped out." "What?" Sure enough, Trina was no longer listed in the rankings. Asuka shot them a message. "Are you okay?" Ruth arrived, dark, curly hair wild and unbound. "Hi." There was something funny about her voice, and her expression was too calm, like the dark surface of the lake before a sudden summer shower. "Trina dropped out." Asuka showed her the stats. You knew?" Asuka asked. Why was she surprised? Ruth always knew everything. "Yes." Ruth folded and refolded her napkin. Mickey set down her fork. "What did you do?" Asuka could hear the words, but she was barely conscious of saying them. It was like one of those old tales, when you open a box expecting gold and find demons instead. "They cheated," Ruth said, and sat up straighter. "I saw them watching Mickey's hands when we took the exam, so I reported them. They were going to be expelled, but they quit first." "What?" Asuka and Mickey said in unison. "Oh no." Mickey covered her mouth. "I wish we could have discussed this first." Asuka's heart turned over. Her roommate could be annoying, but they were talented more than Asuka. How could they have cheated? They were in a rough patch. Hadn't they all been there, drowning and desperate for anything to keep their heads above water? Asuka might have cheated if she were a better liar and thought she could pull it off. But Trina was brilliant. That was plain to see beyond a silly magazine profile. If only they had made Trina stay and study yesterday, if only... Ruth narrowed her eyes. "You knew they were cheating off of you." "I guessed." There were bright red splotches on Mickey's cheeks. "Look, it wasn't an easy decision. I thought very hard about it, and I concluded I had to do it. I did it for all of us." Even so, Asuka saw the tears in Ruth's eyes. She was not as tough as she pretended to be. "No." Mickey's body was very still and erect, her voice steady. She sounded, Asuka thought, like a grown-up. "Someday, when you are captain, you can make all the decisions, but until then, I make my own." "When I'm captain?" Ruth bit out. "Are you making fun of me?" "Come on," said Mickey. Her eyes glittered dangerously. "Whenever you say us, what you really mean is me." Ruth gaped at her. Asuka couldn't understand how things had gone downhill so fast. Wait a sec. Ruth's not the one who cheated. And Ruth and Mickey had propped Trina up all semester. Not unlike what Lala had done for her once. She pushed that thought away. "Trina's right. You always side with Ruth," said Mickey. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin. "I know I did the right thing. You can't rely on someone who cheats. Not when our lives are going to be in each other's hands. I refuse to feel bad about this," said Ruth. "And look, now you're 272. Mickey stood up and smoothed the wrinkles out of her wrinkle-free dress. "I don't think this is working for me." "Me neither," Ruth said. "Wait," Asuka said, but then she didn't know what to say. And then Mickey left, and Asuka and Ruth sat in the silent, vast darkness that inevitably follows the creation of a black hole. Chapter 34. The Phoenix, 3,981 cycles after launch, 1 cycle after the explosion, B to C shifts. What a total stinking egg on the floor mess. Asuka just needed to get away from everyone for a while. From Ruth asking her, WTF are we going to do? From Lala looking at her like this was all her fault. It was. From Yue wanting her to talk to Lala again and get the whole story somehow, even though Lala was adamantly denying everything. She climbed up to the hub, feeling like her brain was full of Sominol. If only her DAR was working. For a moment, during the investigation, she had felt the satisfaction of purpose. That maybe this was her great contribution to the mission, not just as someone who could cover half a shift if a person had a tummy ache or whatever. But now she felt, deep in her bones, that she had screwed up in the most serious way. Because it was all well and good to put personal feelings aside, but she couldn't believe that Lala had done it. And yet, they had her locked up in the nursery under suspicion of murder. Because of Asuka. Not that it didn't look kind of bad. The fingerprints on the radio receiver might be explained by a chance handling in the bot shop. Maybe. Lala had fluttered her hand at AM and explained, I take my gloves off all the time so I can moisturize. Ship air dries out my pretty fingers. The fact that her red-handled drill was in the cleaner bot might be a bad coincidence, but at least one officer reported having seen her carrying it in the hallway, and when asked about it, she admitted that. Now that she thought about it, maybe she'd taken it out of the shop herself instead of lending it to someone. Asuka couldn't help remembering how anxious Lala had been to find the drill again. And then, there was the fact that she couldn't prove where she'd been during the explosion. She disappeared at some point from the shop, gone for a jog around the wheel, apparently. So when the actual blast went off, she was alone in a passageway. No alibi. They were assuming it was part of her vendetta against McMahon. I thought Mission Control thought it was an SME sleeper agent, Asuka tried to point out to Yue. How do you know she isn't? She was one of the few of us who was politically active back home. I never claimed to be an expert, Asuka complained to Alpha as she climbed, but deep down, she'd wanted to be a hero. I know, said Alpha. You should discuss this during your therapy appointment in 19 minutes. The rescheduled appointment. Right. Hard pass. Asuka. Therapy is mandatory for all crew. In the hub, she found Gabriella turning lazy circles. She looked like she hadn't changed her clothes in more than a cycle. There was food stuck to her shirt. They were all operating on too little sleep. Oh, hey, wanna join? Gabriella offered her a blue orb, and they were back in the submarine in the ocean, drifting through dark water illuminated by headlights as they moved along the bottom of the ocean floor. Something bioluminescent floated by. Beer? Gabriella reached into a battered old cooler that appeared from nowhere and produced a baby bottle, which she offered Asuka. Seriously? Asuka said, hefting the bottle. Seemed like the best for drinking in 0G. Asuka lifted it to her lips and took a sip. It wasn't carbonated, and it wasn't beer, but it tasted kind of bitter anyway. What is this? Flavored water. It's foul, said Asuka, passing the bottle back. And I don't want to know what it's flavored with. Gabriella laughed. I know. Back on Earth, they have implants now that can make you taste whatever you want. $10 million procedure. Honestly, I'd pay that much to taste a mochi donut again. Sorry, I'm dabbling. How with Lala? A silverfish swam by, not bothered by Asuka or anything else. Not great. Honestly, I can't believe she did it. Gabriella tipped her gaze up to the patterns of light refracting on the moving water, tracing constellations with her finger. Do you think our children will understand the choices we made? To leave everything behind? If we have children, Asuka thought, but she didn't say it aloud. Of course they'd have children. It would take more work in Asuka's case. So what else is new? They won't know what they missed. Lucky them. Do you ever feel guilty about leaving? I mean, can you imagine if all of us had stayed back there with our training and we'd spend our lives trying to set things right? Maybe it would have been futile, but even this is futile. The whole universe is futile. Stay, go. How do you ever know what makes a difference? Gabriella closed her eyes. The dark folded over her face. Philippines officially entered the war today. American side. It was expected, but I'm so worried about my sister. What if I lose her too? Asuka put her arm out to comfort her. Just then, something thumped behind them in an overhead cabinet marked diving equipment. What was that? Asuka asked, lowering her voice. What? You're messing with me, aren't you? Asuka asked. I get it. Your doors are very realistic. What are you talking about? The hairs on the back of Asuka's neck prickled. There it was again. She floated over to the cabinet, took a deep breath, and threw open the doors. A flock of pigeons, maybe thousands, more than could possibly have fit, came pouring out of the cabinet. Asuka shrieked and covered her head, but because of the zero-G, she ended up spinning off and banging her shoulder hard against a water tank. Are you okay? Called Gabriella. The birds. Columba livia domestica, gasped Asuka. She was trying to calm herself and failing. Didn't you see them? No. It must have been another bug in your implant. Gabriella frowned. Want me to look at it now? We'd have to go down to the programming mod so I can establish a local connection. Asuka lowered her arms, marveling that she wasn't bleeding. Of course not. The birds weren't real. She felt foolish. The shift change bell tolled. That's my cue to get to work, said Gabriella. Coming? A red light appeared like a mote in the corner of Asuka's vision. Message incoming. The captain wanted Asuka to come to the bridge, ASAP. Asuka went back down to the Phoenix's barren plastic and metal world, wondering what they needed the alt for now.